Welcome, wrestling fans, to the Pro Wrestle Machine. Let's jump right into it. April 9, 2001 Wrestling Observer Newsletter, WrestleMania 17 Reviewed. By Dave Meltzer. WrestleMania 17, in almost every way, was the culmination of the wrestling boom. Much like the fantasy of WrestleMania 3, which was the high peak of the 1980s wrestling boom at the Pontiac Silverdome, this show, 14 years later, was all-around greatest major show the World Wrestling Federation ever produced. While WrestleMania 3 was a good show overall, in front of the record crowd, it had an atrocious main event that time and memories have been very kind to, and really only one great match. The in-ring standards of the WWF with the new crew of wrestlers has gone through the roof in the past 2 years, blowing away the quality of any previous time period. From a business standpoint, the show on April 1st at the Reliant Astrodome was most likely the biggest money overall revenue-generating pro wrestling event of all time. The show set not only the building attendance record with a sellout of 67,925 people, but drew the second largest crowd in the history of pro wrestling in the United States behind only WrestleMania 3 for the Hulk Hogan vs. Andre the Giant match. The paid attendance was 62,885, was also the second largest paid crowd ever in North America. The live gate of $3,530,905 was the largest for pro wrestling anywhere outside of Japan and more than doubled the previous American record set at WrestleMania 5 at Trump Plaza in Atlantic City for the Hogan vs. Randy Savage match. It barely beat the previous record for both the WWF and for pro wrestling in North America set at WrestleMania 6 at Toronto Sky Dome for the Hogan vs. Ultimate Warrior match. Pay-per-view figures won't be available for a couple of weeks, but it was certainly thought to have a good shot at breaking the all-time record set for last year's WrestleMania of 824,000 buys. With the price raised from last year's $34.95 to $39.95, it likely broke the all-time revenue record. That isn't certainly because many fans last year purchased an all-day WrestleMania at $49.95. The all-time merchandise record for pro wrestling outside of Japan was also destroyed with $1,111,343 in merchandise sales at the event, more than doubling the record set at WrestleMania 3 of $540,000. From a production standpoint, it was state-of-the-art and then some. In the ring, while there have been shows with no bad matches, maybe even some with more great matches both domestically as well as internationally, this topped any previous WrestleMania. Whether it was the best show WWF ever presented is more debatable, as there have been numerous great shows over the past year, and this show did have its bad points. Until the plethora of hot shows over the past year, the top WWF pay-per-view has generally been considered the 1997 Calgary Stampede show, which was a 2-hour show with only 4 matches, all of which were good to great, but with off-the-charts heat, particularly for the main event. WrestleMania 17 had a few bad matches, but its 3 best matches were on par and in ways even better than the main event of the Stampede, and it was a 4-hour show with far better production, and it always seems better when the big show of the year delivers as opposed to just a monthly show being off the charts and then soon forgotten. The big story in the ring was the Steve Austin heel turn, which went ignored by the live crowd in Houston, which was largely there to cheer Austin to the WWF title by any means necessary. That included working heel style from the start, and gaining the title due to lots of help from Vince McMahon, including a handshake and a beer-drinking toast. The Astrodome crowd largely ignored that McMahon was even there, only seeing Austin winning the title. It was very interesting because the crowd watching on television, led by the announcers' reactions, no doubt reacted completely different than the fans in the building as shown on Raw the next night, while still in Texas. The Austin turn had been on the books for months. Months ago it seemed natural due to the ascension of the younger Rock, who had eclipsed Austin's mainstream popularity. In recent weeks, plans didn't change even though the Vince McMahon standard of listening to the audience would have made him take a different path, as even with Austin's nastier demeanor and playing the psychological heel role, the crowd was beginning to boo Rock when the two confronted each other and the company was having to confiscate signs at the TV tapings. Even months back when the tease for the match began, a Rock interview where he started trash-talking Austin saw the crowd turn on him briefly. By the final week, more due to tweaking of Rock's character, having him punk Austin out a few times on television and be nicer to new employees, the crowd was split in their reactions. But it was a foregone conclusion that wouldn't be the case at the beginning of the match in Houston. Every appearance on the screen of Rock was met with heavy boos while Austin received thunderous cheers. Austin jumped him early, Rock made his trademark babyface comebacks, but the crowd booed Rock anyway. Before the show, security was removing tons of negative signs regarding Rock, which is why they weren't evident during the broadcast. but there were numerous other stories. The WWF, breaking with long-standing company policy, allows references to other federations, Chris Benoit as a former WCW champion who never lost the title, plus Paul Heyman's repeated references to the defunct ECW championships, and even paid homage to its past with a gimmick battle royal. Sadly, that was more of a hit on the internet than it was to the crowd live, most of whom didn't seem to know the majority of the competitors. Quite frankly, the choice of many were strange, as some were big stars of the past, and others were gimmick flops of the past that nobody remembered. And the sad end result of Iron Sheik winning was because his knees are so shaky he could barely move, and there was no way he could take any kind of a bump, so he had to be the last one in. Bobby Heenan and Gene Okerlund, in what may be their last major league television appearance after decades of being fixtures in the business, announced the match. They were encouraged to do all the dated 80s cliches they could in a short period of time to establish them as lovable characters from childhood, but that would always stay in the current fans' childhood. Generally speaking, except for the fitness buffs among the wrestlers who maintained their playing weight, old-timers matches are not kind of pro wrestlers, and thankfully this one was kept short with the emphasis on the ring introductions and the time warp announcing. Edge and Christian captured their record-setting 7th WWF Tag title, a statistic so meaningless nowadays it was never referred to on the broadcast, in the TLC II match over the Dudleys and Hardys. While some of the wrestlers involved expressed disappointment with the match, it was from a psychological standpoint superior to their SummerSlam match. Even more remarkable, in a match filled with crazy spots, was that nobody was seriously injured. From a pure wrestling standpoint, the first 5 minutes of Kurt Angle vs. Chris Benoit was the best stuff in American rings in years. They did a worked amateur style, with Angle showcasing his obvious talents and allowing Benoit to escape. It says a lot for Angle's ego and ability to recognize what he's doing as a work to allow Benoit to appear to be able to out-wrestle him in his own specialty. Benoit, who hadn't done anything remotely like that in a pro ring in his career, and whose only real experience at learning that style was in the mid-80s at the New Japan Dojo, had a match that would have been viewed as a near classic on most shows, but ended up fighting for third best of the night. There were a few negatives. The introduction of WCW talent was a total flop on many levels. It was a damned if you do and damned if you don't situation. The basic feeling was that it was too soon to shoot any kind of angle for WWF versus WCW, since the belief is WCW needs to be rebuilt for a long time first. However, with all the talk regarding the sale and how huge the sale angle was played on television 6 days earlier, the feeling was there had to be some show of support for Shane McMahon evident, but not at ringside where it would be too imperative to shoot an angle. They flew in Johnny Ace, Chavo Guerrero Jr., Mike Awesome, Lance Storm, Hugh Morris, Sean O'Hare, Mark Jindrak, Chuck Palumbo, Mike Sanders, Stacy Keibler, and Sean Stasiak. All with the exception of Ace, who did the calling, were people that WWF purchased the contracts from WCW in the sale. The wrestlers were told to bring their gear and their championship belts, in the case of Palumbo and O'Hare, so unless they were shooting publicity photos, they may have had a different idea originally what they were going to do and put them in a luxury box. As it turned out, they were brought in together, never brought backstage to talk to any of the wrestlers, and by the time they returned to the hotel, the WWF crew had already left. There is expected to be a meeting with the 24 wrestlers signed and the WWF sometime this week. Another reason this group were the specific ones signed is almost all, if not all, have their 90-day cycles expiring within a month, so they can be cut loose and renegotiated with if need be imminently, and WWF is under no obligation to honor their contracts if they cycle them out soon. Even though Shane was the strong babyface in the match, when he talked about WCW wrestlers and they were shown, without any graphics or mention of who they actually were, which made it so rinky-dink, the crowd booed them out of the building. The lack of star power meant the first impression of the angle took a lot of steam away from it without people like Flair, DDP, Goldberg, Hogan or Steiner, that virtually all casual fans would think would be part of a purchase of WCW. It was clear from the short revitalizing the brand and giving it its own television show was going to be an uphill battle, but it looked even steeper after this non-angle. Some storyline gaffes regarding non-selling of injuries also made parts of the booking WCW like. Chyna's career-ending neck injury, which was supposed to give her an Achilles heel and explain why she's now wrestling women, saw Chyna blow off the injury in an interview, saying she was fine, and sell almost nothing in her title win over Ivory, which was a one-sided squash, the only positive of which is that the fans see her as a star, and the bookers know to keep her ring name short. A similar situation was more minor, involving Lita in the TLC II match. The announcer sold the idea early that Lita wouldn't be at ringside to set up her late run-in due to injuries suffered on TV when Rhino speared her. However, In a pre-tape package from festivities earlier in the week, she was shown without any signs of an injury before the announcers talked about her injury. There were a couple of minor talent issues that surfaced during the week leading up to the show. The complete card was made clear after SmackDown the previous Tuesday, leading a lot of the wrestlers who had been with the company on the road all year that weren't booked on the show upset about not sharing in the biggest payday of the year. By the latter part of the week, the word was out that virtually every full-timer on the roster would have a part in the show. The tradition has been those time-wasting battle royals, or the hardcore match last year, but with the gimmick battle royal, doing another multi-person match would be overkill, in some form except for a few on the bottom rung. Then, the night before the show, apparently plans changed and everyone originally off the show was off the show again, likely because they were already doing a 4-hour Mania and it wasn't a good idea to add live matches to Heat. Several wrestlers were vocal, among them Blackman, because he had always done his job and been on the road all year, and X-Pac, who until recently had always been kept as one of the main players on the squad. X-Pac said he was going to Triple H, and when show time came, many of the people originally off the show were back on. Of the guys on the main roster, the ones not on the show were Rikishi, busted eardrum, Scotty 2 Hotty, neck injury, Tori, tough enough, Billy Gunn, Al Snow, tough enough, K-Quick, Crash, and Molly Holly, Bob Holly, injury, Big Boss Man, his new gimmick hasn't been introduced yet, Low Down, Kayontai, Essa Rios, and Terry. Also appearing on the show in cameos from WWF New York were Lou Albano, Fred Blassie, Jimmy Snuka, and A. Just Incredible, Peter Polacco, and X-Pac. Sean Waltman beat Steve Blackman and Grandmaster Sexay, Brian Lawler, in 2:46 in a match for Sunday Night Heat. There didn't seem any purpose to this and the crowd didn't care. Albert took out GMS, allowing the other two to superkick Blackman, and X-Pac pinned him. X and JC and Albert are now known collectively as the X Factor. 1. Chris Jericho, Chris Irvine, pinned William Regal, Darren Matthews, in 7:08 to retain the IC title. Match was fine, in some ways well wrestled by Regal, although Jericho had one of those matches where he was slightly off on things. Where it ended up disappointing is that it was just too short. Jericho opened by slightly overshooting on a pescado. Paul Heyman did a good job setting the stage for the match, which was built around Regal working on Jericho's shoulder, saying Jericho was injured from being in the Regal stretch on SmackDown. Regal posted Jericho's shoulder twice. Jericho came back with a lionsault, but Regal got his knees up. Crowd was quiet except when they teased a signature move. Regal undid the turnbuckle pad and rammed Jericho's left shoulder into it twice. Jericho came back with 2 Enzui-Jiris and a missile dropkick for a near fall. Regal did a double-arm superplex off the top. Regal stretched, but Jericho made the ropes and came back with a lionsault for the pin. Crowd wasn't ready for the match to end. 2 stars. 2. Bradshaw, Don Layfield, and Farouk, Ron Simmons, and Taz, Peter C. Nursha, beat Goodfather, Charles Wright, and Bull Buchanan, Barry Buchanan, and Val Venus, Sean Morley, in 3:53. Jackie DDT's Steven Richards right away, and it looked nasty. Mainly heat on Taz, who had a spot messed up when he was sent into the ropes. Goodfather then sat on Taz's face while being off on a leg drop, which may have hurt Taz. Match ended abruptly with Goodfather missing a tackle into the buckles, and Bradshaw pinning him with a clothesline. Nothing to the match. 1/2 stars. 3. Kane, Glenn Jacobs, won the hardcore title over Raven, Scott Levy, and Big Show, Paul White, in 9:18. No Pete Rose this year in the Kane match. They tried to do something different from the rest of the show and have most of the match backstage. Not before Kane did a flying clothesline off the top rope to the floor on show. Backstage, Raven went flying through a plate glass window and ended up being all cut up. Show was whipped through a door. He and Kane fought in a small room and they went through the wall into another room Raven was in. They ended up driving golf carts and Kane ran over Raven's ankle. Match ended up going too long. Finish saw them back on the stage in front of the crowd and there was a crash pit by the stage. Show had Raven up for a press slam when Kane kicked them both off the stage. To make sure everyone knew it was a gimmick spot, Kane jumped off the stage into the apparent foam rubber-laden pit, bouncing like little kids at a playground, and pinned Show. This wouldn't be the last time something this silly was on the show. 1 3/4 stars. 4. Eddie Guerrero pinned Test, Andrew Martin, to win the European title in 8:30. Perry Saturn came out with Guerrero wearing a funny hat which was a cross between a buff Bagwell hat decorated with the furry stuff Bruiser Brody used to wear on his boots. Real visual size problem here with Test a legit 6'6" and Guerrero at 5'6" January 2nd. At one point Test got his ankle caught in the ropes and the ref couldn't break him loose. At another spot, Guerrero just fell out of the ring. Finally, after far too long, Guerrero and Saturn sort of had to break character and spread the ropes to get him free. Test came back with a tilt-a-whirl slam and a tilt-a-whirl into a power bomb for a near fall. Saturn did sort of a fisherman's buster on Test when the ref wasn't looking, which they are giving a long silly name to. They talked a lot about Guerrero's family history in wrestling. Test did a pump handle slam on Guerrero and punched Saturn, but Guerrero kicked out of the pin. Dean Malenko came out and distracted the ref while Guerrero got the title belt and hit Test with it for the pin. 2 1/4 stars. 5. Kurt Angle pinned Chris Benoit in 14:02. Angle insulted the Texas crowd to make sure Benoit got a decent face reaction, because the Benoit turn psychologically hasn't been handled well and fans really haven't seen it as any kind of a turn, because if you pay attention, it hasn't been. They did awesome mat work early. Like the best mat work in this country in years. Angle basically did all his amateur takedowns and was tremendous in doing so, and gave Benoit openings for escapes and reversals. Fans politely applauded the mat work, which was a risk because when you have such a large audience, the real wrestling fan percentage is usually low as compared to people who are going to the one show of their lifetime and aren't going to be as into the wrestling itself as a smaller crowd would figure to be. They kept this up for several minutes and the crowd still appreciated it until Angle did the subtle heel forearm and sending Benoit into steps. Angle started suplexing Benoit all over the place. Benoit came back with a superplex off the top and a rolling German suplex, and then Benoit used Angle's ankle lock on him. Benoit also got a crossface and Angle needed to make the ropes, but then Angle got the crossface, and actually did a more believable version of the move than Benoit, for a rope break. There was a weak and needless ref bump here. This match was getting over in a different type of suspension of disbelief manner, and the ref bump really hurt the match because it woke everyone up to the fact what they were watching was the same as everything else on the show. The ref bump was for Benoit to get the crossface and for Angle to tap, setting the stage for Benoit being screwed. But since they were already doing that in the post-match interview, it didn't seem to serve a purpose. Angle used the newly named Angle Slam for a near fall. He went for a moonsault, but Benoit got his knees up, which actually hit Angle in the face and his moonsault positioning was off. Benoit used a diving headbutt for a near fall but Angle got the pin out of nowhere using the tights. This was the old Jack Briscoe Dory Funk Jr. psychology in that both would work a scientific match, but Funk would heel while keep world champion wrestler credibility by showing he could really wrestle, but take subtle shortcuts, which because of the context, got over better than all the overt heel tactics in the undercard usually. Very similar to early Don Fry in Japan in that in the context of a match that looks real, something simple like not breaking clean on the ropes can generate a ton of heat. After the match, Angle did an interview and Benoit attacked him and put him in the crossface and Angle tapped again. 4 1/4 stars. 6. China Joni Lauer won the women's title from Ivory, Lisa Moretti, in 2:39. China has dropped a lot of weight, slimming down but also dropping a lot of muscle mass to try and give her a more mainstream look. Match was terrible because it was a total ego show. China blew off the injury angle. Ivory hit her with a belt shot at the bell, but she made a quick comeback and it was a one-sided squash. China gave her a power bomb, then lifted her up at 2. She then gave her a press slam and pinned her by just laying backwards like it was a piece of cake, showing no respect to her at all. -1 stars. Jeff Bagwell and Moises Alou of the Astros were interviewed at ringside. Bagwell said wrestlers were great actors. 7. Shane McMahon pinned Vince McMahon in a street fight in 14:12. Shane pointed out the WCW talent in the building before the match, which was a funny reaction since he was the face, and the crowd turned on him. Stephanie came out with Vince and slapped Shane early. Shane got a kendo stick and started hitting his father. The gimmick with the kendo sticks is if you get hit in the middle, there is a lot of give, but on the ends it hurts like hell. Vince potatoed Shane at one point as late in the match he was getting a mouse on his eye. Vince isn't a well-trained worker physically in that his stuff looks bad, but he knows how to play a crowd and is willing to get hit. The big spot was Shane coming off the top rope through the Spanish announcer's table when Vince was pulled to safety by Stephanie. Trish wheeled out Linda for the big spot. Trish slapped Vince, which was all the revenge this girl was getting. Stephanie and Trish brawled to the back. With Linda supposedly all doped up, Vince called her a bitch, pulled her out of her wheelchair and put her in a chair in the corner and kept verbally abusing her. Vince threatened to beat up Linda, but ref Mick Foley stopped him and he and Vince had their fights, including Vince hitting him twice with chair shots. Vince grabbed a garbage can to hit Shane, but Linda got up out of the chair and gave Vince a low blow. Shane then put a garbage can in front of Vince's face and came off the top rope all the way across the ring with a dropkick to the garbage can, a modified Van Terminator for the pin. 3 stars. 8. Edge, Adam Copeland, and Christian J. Resso regained the WWF tag titles in a 3-way tables, ladders and chairs match over the Dudleys, Mark LaMonica and Devin Hughes, and Matt and Jeff Hardy. They announced Lita was injured, but had been airing stuff from the weekend showing her being fine. Christian took an early bump where it looked like he was supposed to crotch himself, but overshot the ropes and crashed on the floor, and it looked like he'd be done for the match. But he got up and seemed fine. They brought the ladder in just 45 seconds in. Lots of bumps off the ladder. At one point Bubba powerbombed Jeff onto Edge through a table. They set up 2 stacks of 2 tables for the last stunt in the match. Spike Dudley showed up and gave the acid drop to Edge and put Christian through a table. Rhino came in and speared Bubba. He then put Matt through the table. Lita came out and hit a Hurricane Rana on Rhino. Dudley's did the old Doomsday device on Rhino. Lita then took off her shirt, revealing her bra, but for her trouble, they 3DD her through a table. Jeff pulled out a 14-foot ladder to set up the swanton dive off the top onto Rhino and Spike and putting all 3 through a table. Jeff was to set up a spot where he'd jump from ladder to ladder and grab the belts, although he'd be thwarted. However, he messed up the first time when the ladders lost balance. He went back to do it again and did it right, which momentarily conjured up thoughts of a Sabu stunt show. This time when he was hanging, Edge climbed halfway up the 14-foot ladder and gave him a flying spear, causing Hardy to land from close to 10 feet on his back. Matt and Bubba climbed up, but the ladders were shoved by Rhino and they took a spectacular bump over the top rope, crashing through the 2 sets of 2 stacked up tables set side by side. Finish saw Rhino pick Christian up on his shoulders and climb the ladder with Christian on his back so he could grab the belt and come down as the winner. 4 3/4 stars. 9. Iron Sheik Hossein Khosrau Baziri won a short old-timers battle royal in 3:05. The ring intros were campy, as was the commentary by Gene Okerlund and Bobby Heenan. Sheik was so immobile than coming down the aisle and moving so slowly, Heenan joked Sheik wouldn't make it to the ring until WrestleMania 38. Originally Goldberg was to be in the Battle Royal, but he was pulled from the show because they were afraid it might start a Goldberg chant, which was a smart move on their part. Remainder of the guys in were Bushwhackers, Brian Wickens and Robert Miller, Duke Dries, Mike Dries, Earthquake, John Tena who has lost a lot of weight, Goon, Barney Bill Irwin, Doink the Clown, without Dink. This was Gary Falk, Kimala, James Harris, Kim Chi, Steve Lombardi, Repo Man Bar Darso, Jim Cornette, Nikolai Volkov, Josip Peruzovic, Freebird Michael Hayes, Michael Zeitz, One Man Gang George Gray, who apparently came as Gang instead of Akeem because he had lost so much weight his Akeem costume didn't fit, Gobbledygooker, Hector Guerrero, Tugboat Fred Ottman, Hillbilly Jim, Jim Morris, Brother Love, Bruce Pritchard, and Sergeant Slaughter, Robert Remus. A lot of the wrestlers got no reaction, which isn't a surprise, because many of them in their heyday also got no reaction. Bushwhackers as cult favorites Hayes, who was big in Texas, Love, from Houston and Jim, more because of having catchy entrance music, got nice reactions. Guys were thrown out as quick as possible, leaving Sheik alone in the ring as the winner. Slaughter then put Sheik in a Cobra clutch after the match and Sheik went out and Slaughter's music played. Dud. 10. Undertaker Mark Calloway pinned Triple H Paul Levesque in 1817. Motorhead played Triple H's music as he came to the ring. The lead singer didn't know the words, so that was funny. It's funny because Triple H never does a clean job, and he did here, and instead of elevating a new star, he put over an established star, which is so smart politically, doing a clean job on the biggest show of the year while at the same time not making a new star. Both guys worked really hard, as you'd figure. They quickly broke the second Spanish announcer's table. Triple H got the sledgehammer early, but ref Mike Chioda took it away. Undertaker catapulted Triple H into Chioda. Undertaker used a choke slam, but Chioda was groggy and got there slow, so Triple H kicked out. Undertaker then kicked and elbow dropped the ref. Luckily that is no longer a DQ. Triple H took a nice bump over the top. The two went into the stands and brawled. Triple H gave Undertaker a hard chair shot to the back and a not so hard shot to the head, being he just got the staples out. Triple H delivered 8 more chair shots, which was strange in hindsight since that was the finish of the main event. They brawled into this camera pit and Undertaker choke slammed Triple H over the pit into this gimmick gymnastics pit. This was so stupid because the camera just showed this unbelievable sight of Triple H going over this railing, disappearing into thin air as Ross talked about a big drop onto concrete. They showed more replays of the same thing. Then they killed it with a final replay actually showing his landing was into a gimmicked foam rubber pit, basically turning the match from serious to comedy and making Ross look bad trying to sell it as devastating. Undertaker, like a young kid at a jungle gym, did an elbow drop into the pit, making it even sillier since you could see the foam rubber protect his fall. Even sillier, the EMTs came out for Triple H and Undertaker attacked them. By the time they got back in the ring, it was nearly 14 minutes into the match. Undertaker got the sledgehammer and teased using it forever. Instead, Triple H had time for a low blow. They traded punches until Undertaker used the tombstone, but again no ref. Undertaker set up the last ride power bomb, but Triple H hit him in the head with the sledgehammer and potatoed him, busting Undertaker up. Undertaker quickly came back and won with a last ride power bomb. 3.5 stars. 11. Steve Williams won the WWF title from Rock, Dwayne Johnson, in 28:06. Hot pace early. The vast majority of the crowd cheered Austin. You couldn't hear any boos for Austin, even when he did the full-fledged turn. There were always some cheers for Rock, but the boos would quickly overwhelm the cheers. Austin undid the turnbuckle padding. Austin hit Rock with the ring bell. Before this happened, Rock stumbled and fell down to grab the blade that Earl Hebner dropped on the ground for him. Very obvious as TV caught it all. Austin beat on him to open the cut-up worse. Rock came back and put Austin's forehead into the exposed turnbuckle and he bladed. Austin catapulted Rock into the post and he juiced even more. Austin hit him with one of the monitors and put on the sharpshooter, with the bloody Austin being reminiscent of the Bret Hart vs. Austin match 4 years ago at Mania where Austin made his face turn. Austin made the ropes. Austin then put the sharpshooter on Rock, but Rock didn't make the ropes and powered out. Austin put it on a second time and Rock made the ropes. Austin used the Cobra Clutch, the old $1 Million Dream finisher he used as the ringmaster in 1996, but Rock kicked off the ropes while in the old backwards for a near fall, the pin that Hart got on Austin at Survivor Series in 1996. Older fans will remember it as the finish of the 1971 match where Pedro Morales beat Ivan Koloff for the WWF title. Rock hit a stunner for a near fall when Vince came out. Austin hit Rock's spinebuster for a near fall and Rock came back with a spinebuster in People's Elbow and McMahon broke up the pin with a save. Rock went after Vince but Austin gave him the rock bottom for a near fall. Austin used a low blow and held Rock for McMahon to hit him with a chair. Even at this point the crowd refused to turn on Austin even though the belief was the McMahon heel character was strong enough to turn him. They wouldn't turn on this night. They traded more near falls including Rock using the rock bottom and Austin using the stunner. McMahon gave Austin a chair to use again but Rock kicked out. Finally Austin went berserk using a chair and hit Rock up and down his body at least 15 times before scoring the pin. Austin and McMahon shook hands and drank beer together after the match. Fans still cheered Austin and after they left, when Rock finally recovered, he was still being booed. 4.5 stars. WrestleMania record set. Where WrestleMania 17 stands as far as a business record event. Total live attendance. The figure of 67,925 fans would rank 7th on the all-time recorded list. There is wrestling legend of matches in places like India, Pakistan and the Middle East drawing incredible crowds dating back to the turn of the century and some of those stories may even be true. Even the so-called verified list we have has some question marks. Clearly the 2 New Japan shows in 1995 in North Korea drew more than 150,000 fans as well as the Hogan-Andre match at WrestleMania 3 on March 29, 1987 which drew about 78,000 and the August 31, 1992 SummerSlam match headlined by Bret Hart vs. British Bulldog from Wembley Stadium in London which drew about 75,000 are ahead of this figure. While there is a listed attendance of 70,000 for the April 4, 1998 Tokyo Dome show headlined by Antonio Inoki vs. Don Frye, I find it impossible to believe. Even with standing room, they can put that many people into that stadium so Mania could be as high as number 5. Also, the listed figure of 69,300 for the August 28, 1986 Toronto Exhibition Stadium show headlined by Hogan vs. Paul Orndorff was an exaggerated listed figure, with the real number about 64,100. The April 1, 1990 Toronto Sky Dome figure for WrestleMania 6 for Hogan vs. Warrior has always been listed at 67,678, but that is a worked number with the real figure being 64,287. Paid attendance. The figure of 62,885 ranks as the second highest ever in the United States, as well as the second highest ever in North America, trailing only WrestleMania 3 at the Pontiac Silverdome which drew a paid attendance of about 75,700. Other legitimate figures for major WWF Stadium shows were $61,864 for the Hogan Warrior WrestleMania at Sky Dome, $61,470 for the Hogan Orndorff match at Toronto Exhibition Stadium, $48,014 for the January 21, 1997 Royal Rumble show from the Alamodome in San Antonio headlined by Shawn Michaels vs. Psycho Sid, and $37,000 legit for the April 5, 1992 WrestleMania at the Hoosier Dome on April 5, 1992 headlined by Hogan vs. Sid. Live gate. The $3,530,905 live gate at the Astrodome was the largest in history outside of Japan. There are numerous Japanese shows that have beaten that figure, with the all-time record being about $7 million for the Inoki retirement show on April 4, 1998 at the Tokyo Dome. The old North American and WWF record was $3,490,857 US set at the Sky Dome for the Hogan Warrior match. The existing American record of $1,628,000 at WrestleMania 5 from Trump Plaza headline by Hogan vs. Savage was broken on the first day tickets went on sale for this show. Merchandise. The $1,111,343 total at the Astrodome may have more than doubled both the WWF company record and North American record. The North American record was $540,000, set at WrestleMania 3 at the Pontiac Silverdome. It is believed that the all-time WWF record was set at the August 31, 1992 SummerSlam show at Wembley Stadium in London. We should have the figure next week for that, as WWF didn't have the figures available by press time. There are also numerous Japanese shows that have beaten that figure. It didn't even approach the all-time pro wrestling record of $2,600,000 set on April 4, 1998 for the Inoki retirement show at the Tokyo Dome, which also set the all-time per head merchandise record of $37.14. The October 9, 1995 Tokyo Dome show headlined by the first Keiji Muto vs. Nobuhiko Takada match drew just under $2 million in merchandise, and the November 29, 1989 Tokyo Dome show headlined by Akira Maeda vs. Willie Wilhelm did $1.8 million in merchandise. The per head, figuring on paid attendance merchandise, was $17.67 per head, which would be the second biggest figure in the history of the WWF, trailing only the $19.98 per head at last year's Mania from Anaheim. Pay-per-view. Even preliminary figures aren't available at press time. The all-time record of $824,000 was set last year at WrestleMania for the Triple H vs. Rock vs. Mick Foley vs. Big Show four-way match on April 2, 2000. This show was thought to have a good shot at beating that record. The total pay-per-view gross record was also set with that show of an estimated $31.32 million. WWF's are of that would be about 42% after the cable companies and in demand take their first cut, or about $13.15 million. Because the price was raised this year from $34.95 to $39.95. Even taking into account that a lot of people last year paid $49.95 and got an all-day package. This year's show would have to have 784,000 orders to become the biggest grossing pro wrestling and biggest non-boxing pay-per-view event in history. The largest pay-per-view buy rate was approximately 8.0%, done twice, for the Hogan vs. Andre WrestleMania, and a Japanese buy rate of approximately the same for the Hickson Gracie vs. Nobuhiko Takada match on October 11, 1997. This show, nor will any show in history due to the maturity of the pay-per-view industry, ever approach that figure. Total revenue. This will, because of pay-per-view, be almost certainly the biggest money event in the history of pro wrestling. Last year's Mania would hold that distinction with $31.32 on pay-per-view, another $1,347,800 as a live gate, and $277,125 in merchandise, totaling approximately $32.95 million. If one would estimate 800,000 pay-per-view buys for this show, the gross would be for pay-per-view, live gate and merchandise $36.60 million. If it isn't obvious enough, just how much pro wrestling has changed over the past 2 or so months was evident when the 2001 issue of the Pro Wrestling Index in Japan came out. While this isn't a listing someone in this country would likely come out with, from people watching our wrestling from afar, the people they put on the front and back cover as the biggest stars of American wrestling were Steve Austin, Rock, Bill Goldberg, Kevin Nash, Kurt Angle, Triple H, Scott Steiner, and Sandman. Half the people on that list at this moment are no longer major league wrestlers. The fate of the wrestling talent from WCW, aside from the 24 wrestlers whose contracts were picked up, is totally up in the air at this point. There have been stories about what Time Warner will offer wrestlers under contract as part of buyouts. The WWF has made it clear it won't sign any wrestlers unless they are no longer working for Time Warner, and have not approached anyone whose contracts they don't now own with a serious offer, although part of that is due to the hectic schedule of the people who would make those decisions, Vince McMahon and Jim Ross, between football and WrestleMania. Without any offers from Time Warner or WWF, the rest of the crew is left in the dark. So whatever decisions are going to be made by the biggest names are totally up in the air. And it is that fate that will determine if the WWF version of WCW is just a B team doomed to failure, or is something that will eventually provide a serious interpromotional war. The key players in determining this game are Bill Goldberg, Ric Flair, and Scott Steiner. From the moment the announcement was made, the match everyone was talking about was Goldberg versus Austin. However, Goldberg has more than 2 years left on his Time Warner contract, which pays in excess of $2 million per year, almost $6 million total. WWF can make the decision to pay him enough to ask for a buyout on that deal. Doing so will make likely, because of the money it took to get him, that he'd be used correctly to make money. It will also make a lot of wrestlers upset, which nobody wants to do, but wrestlers today also have no options. It would also upset the careful salary structure of the company, something McMahon now can control better than ever with no competition. For that latter reason, I don't expect McMahon to make the big offer and land Goldberg, but the ball is in his court. Similarly, it now looks like the possibility that Ric Flair's final pro wrestling match, at least for the time being, may have been the match with Sting last week. Flair has 2 years left at $800,000 per year and 52, would be quite content to take the money and stay home. It is doubtful WWF will pay anywhere near that kind of money for a wrestler whose time in the ring is very limited and whose main value is that his face is the most closely associated with the WCW brand. He can be a strong interview that handled correctly, can pull ratings, something that may be desperately needed with a new product in a bad time slot. Do they want that enough to pay that kind of money for someone who won't be wrestling 200 nights a year on the road? Probably not, but the decision hasn't been made, and Goldberg, Flair, DDP and Booker T were the only major stars that the top brass in WWF originally were interested in. It's almost ironic that the sum of the biggest news stories of this or any other year, such as the television industry turning its back on wrestling, which is in reality the biggest news story of the last month as for long-term ramifications on the business, the TBS and TNT cancellations are much bigger stories than the buyout itself, although all of these stories are tied together as one. And the possible end of the careers of both Flair and Sting are getting buried under the sale itself. Of the named WCW talent, at this point only Booker T looks to be WWF bound. Sting, Kevin Nash and DDP have 10 months to 1 year left on their contracts. WWF doesn't appear to have any interest in the former two, and the latter is unlikely to be put in a position to make anywhere close to what he'd make just sitting it out. Again, until all wrestlers have heard from both sides as to what they can make doing what, nothing is definite. Another factor that needs to be put into play is that it is in Time Warner's best interest that all of these wrestlers go to WWF. There is no company benefit to keeping them under contract and paying them with no company in existence. There is not even, after the next 30 days, going to be a few administrators in the old office working on the transition, so someone could book them out and collect a booking fee as a way to offset some of the contract costs, such as to Japanese promotions on foreign tours or to independent promotions. Time Warner will be looking for any excuse to be able to legally void the contracts, so any breaches, such as a wrestler working indie dates, will be used to cancel the remainder of the contract. There aren't even the nasty games to get out of the contract that could be played, such as the WWF, in getting out of Steve Williams' contract, booking him to FMW where he wouldn't go out of loyalty to his years, and as it turned out his future, with All Japan. When he didn't go as booked, it was the contract breach that allowed the WWF to get out of paying the rest of his deal once the decision was made. Williams was a pawn at the time in a political struggle between Vince Russo and Jim Ross for power, and at the time Russo had more pull not to use him. Since the contracts are assignable in most cases, they could book the bigger names on long Japanese tours, hoping they won't go, and then using that as a breach, except they aren't even keeping a front office to do so. A 3-hour meeting was held on April 2nd in Trenton, New Jersey to propose what would become a uniform list of rules for MMA within New Jersey, with an attempt to take those rules to the Association of Boxing Commissioners and take them national, thereby legitimizing these rules in every state with an athletic commission. The latter is still a long time away from being a reality, with UFC now seemingly making New Jersey its unofficial home, as the past 2 pay-per-view events were held there and the next 2 are also scheduled for there. This had a major bearing on the future of UFC. The 3-hour meeting, headed by Larry Hazzard, the director of the New Jersey State Athletic Control Board, included representatives from UFC, Pride and IFC as well as Nevada State Athletic Commission Chairman Mark Ratner listening in via telephone. The biggest change is when it comes to weight classes. UFC has had 4 weight classes: under 155, under 170, under 200 and unlimited. The new weight classes, which will also include weight classes being renamed, are as such. Under 125.9 pounds flyweight, 126 to 134.9 bantamweight, 135 to 144.9 featherweight, 145 to 154.9 lightweight, 155 to 169.9 welterweight, 170 to 184.9 middleweight, 185 to 204.9 light heavyweight, 205 to 264.9 heavyweight, 265 plus super heavyweight. This is probably the biggest change, and part of this was likely at the prompting of UFC itself, which has talked about, as mentioned here in the past, adding a weight class at 185 and moving the 200 limit up to 205. This is probably fairer, and it also shows in a sense non-protection of the company's golden boy, Tito Ortiz. Even though Ortiz did lose to a much smaller Frank Shamrock in the 1999 Fight of the Year, he was much larger than most everyone he was fighting. Many of the top fighters in the world, like Shamrock, Kazushi Sakuraba, Kiyoshi Tamura, Yuki Kondo and Dan Henderson, all fight in the 200 class, but their natural bodyweight ranges from 185 for Sakuraba to 193 for Kondo, and would be better off fighting at 185. The irony of Shamrock himself is that his walk-around weight is usually 185, and unlike most fighters who get in shape for fights and drop weight, he eats like a pig before fights, which is exactly what you aren't supposed to do. To get his weight up to the 190 to 195 range, and his announced weight at shows is often misleading since he's weighed in fully clothed, carrying a heavy book or a jug of water. Pat Miletic, who holds the UFC title at 170, actually has a natural bodyweight more than Shamrock, as he walks around non-training at 190 when training gets down to the low 180s and restricts fluids from his days as a wrestler, as did Ortiz, a natural 225-pounder who has been fighting at 199 to weigh in at 170. The introduction of the super heavyweight class at this point in my view is a negative. First off, all the top unlimited weight class fighters in the world right now, like Mark Coleman, Kevin Randleman, who will now cut to 205 and probably face Ortiz later this year, Mark Kerr, Kazuyuki Fujita, Igor Vovchankin, Valentin Overeem, Ken Shamrock, Heath Herring, Pedro Rizzo and Antonio Nogueira range in fighting weight from 210 to 245. There hasn't been anyone over 265 yet who has been a major force. Tom Erickson fought at 285, but was knocked out by Herring recently, although he may have been the exception if he was a few years younger. Ricardo Moraes was at 275, but was handled by Coleman as well as Grom Zaza. As people get larger, this may someday be necessary, but now it seems to be like boxing, where if they added a super heavyweight division over 265, the fact is, the heavyweight champion would beat the super heavyweight champ with ease, and as long as that's the case, there is no need for the division as it only demeans in the public's view the heavyweight champ. The rules for the most part remain the same that UFC has been operating under with a few minor modifications. There are no allowable uses of the knees or feet for kicking and kneeing if an opponent is on the mat. UFC rules did not make using knees when both fighters are down illegal, although that hadn't been allowed on recent shows in New Jersey. Pride recently changed its rules to allow both kicking and kneeing a downed opponent, and those rules changed the entire nature of several of the fights last week. All footwear has been banned as well as tops, shirts or gis. No wrestling singlets or t-shirts. The elimination of the gi, which fighters haven't fought in for a long time in UFC, Royce Gracie still fought in a gi in Pride, does change the fight, although since it hasn't been used of late, it's not a major change. Certain foot and ankle locks are easier to use when the fighter is wearing shoes. In addition, shoes help the wrestlers as far as shooting off the mat. UFC allowed a certain type of shoe that one could kick with, and any type of shoe was legal if the participant would agree to not kick. The key rule for marketability at present, the ability to punch from any position, was kept legal. The commission approved combat in either a fenced-in area, the UFC trademarked octagon cage, or inside a wrestling or boxing ring. They are going to mandate a certain type of glove which they are having developed, which would weigh 4 to 6 ounces. They appointed a committee to design and manufacture official gloves, and all participants must wear only these gloves. Like with UFC, rounds will be 5 minutes in length. Unlike in Pride, there are no stand-ups allowed to be ordered by the ref in case action is slowed. These are largely rule changes UFC, under Joe Silva and Jeff Blatnick, who pretty well wrote the rule book, were in favor of. The stand-ups is a controversial point, because the lack of stand-up can slow the action when fighters are stalemated on the ground. However, the feeling was that the application of stand-ups was inconsistent from fight to fight, and the elimination of them was to eliminate an inconsistency. New Jersey will appoint referees and judges can be appointed to any show. This is actually an interesting point, since one of the biggest names in the UFC is referee John McCarthy. Theoretically, this means they have a pool of referees and appoint them for various shows, and I don't know if a special case would be made for McCarthy, who referees all UFC main events and most major matches. Theoretically, this would mean McCarthy, who is as synonymous with the UFC as the octagon cage, could also be picked to referee at rival shows. In what was billed as his final match ever in Mexico City, 55-year-old Pedro Pero Aguayo seemed to set up his next comeback after going out on a stretcher with his head shaved to end EMLL's pay-per-view show on March 30th before a sellout crowd of 17,670 fans at Arena Mexico. Aguayo lost the main event to Universo 2000 in a hair versus mask match, due both to outside interference of longtime rival Mascara Ano 2000 as well as distraction from someone in the stands with a Pierre Roth Jr. mask on. Aguayo had beaten Universo's older brother, at perhaps the biggest wrestling show ever in Mexico on April 30, 1993 at the Plaza de Toros before nearly 50,000 fans to win his mask, and the two have renewed that feud numerous times with lucrative results over the years. This was the first pay-per-view in the history of EMLL where the face didn't go over at the end, and was set up by an undercard where the faces won every match except for one match, which was the battle for the Infernales name. That was because it was a battle of Rudo teams, although El Satanico, as the original Infernale, was put in the sympathetic babyface role in the storyline build-up and his team won, so you could say the faces won that match as well. This was at one point also scheduled to be the first wrestling pay-per-view emanating from Mexico to be broadcast into the United States, but a few weeks before the show, negotiations broke down between Televisa and the American promoters, and at this point it is very unlikely any pay-per-view show from Arena Mexico will be broadcast into the United States. We should have a more detailed report in a week or two after viewing a tape of the show. 1. Zuki and Ultimo Dragonchito beat Fiorito and Pierrotito in a best-of-3 fall minis match in 13-11. Zuki is better known in the US as Max Mini in his period with the WWF after splitting falls. Dragoncito pinned Fiorito with a Hurricane Rana. Zuki appeared to have been injured hitting his head on the floor when catching Pierrotito doing a dive. He's awfully small to be catching. 2. Astro Rey Jr., a late sub for Juventud Guerrera who apparently has left for AAA, and Pantera and Felino beat Rincor Latino and Archangel, late sub for Zumbito, and Venenon in 14-17. In the third fall, Rey Jr. used a Hurricane Rana on Archangel. Veneno then eliminated Rey Jr., and Pantera knocked Veneno out after a big dive. This left Felino and Latino, with Felino scoring a pin after a powerbomb off the top rope. Latino had to be helped out of the ring. Reported as being an excellent match. 3. Atlantis and Brazo de Plata and Negro Casas beat Dr. Wagner Jr. and Scorpio Jr. and Apollo Dantes in 18 minutes. Again, the team split the first two falls. Third fall saw Atlantis use his Atlantia torture rack on Wagner to eliminate him. Casas pinned Scorpio Jr. with his Casita, La Magistral, and finally Super Porky used the Senton on Dantes for the winning pin. 4. Safari and Olympico and Mr. Niebla won the Mexican National Trios titles from Fuerza Guerrera and El Signo and Blue Panther in 21-50 in what was billed as a battle of 80s stars, Fuerza's championship team, against 90s stars. As mentioned previously, these belts had been forgotten about since 1996. They were a big deal in AAA through 1995 when Guerrera and Panther and Psicosis held them, but fell apart as far as popularity when Psicosis left AAA for the old Promel promotion and Guerrera and Panther left AAA for EMLL. Not much in the way of details on this match other than it was said to have been good. 5. El Satanico and Black Warrior and Shocker won the rights to the trio name of Los Infernales, beating Ultimo Guerrero and Rey Bucanero and Tarzan Boy in 1645. There's an interesting deal here because Shocker is already part of the other Top Hill group called Los Guapos with Scorpio Jr. and Bestia Salvaje. Satanico's feud with former partners Guerrero and Bucanero has been a pretty hot feud these past few months at Arena Mexico. After splitting falls, Shocker did a sensational dive on Guerrero and Warrior did his trademark tope of death on Bucanero. He does the fastest and most devastating tope in Mexican wrestling. This left Satanico and Tarzan Boy, who have feuded for years, usually with Tarzan as the face, and in fact, Tarzan's heel turn was precipitated by the fans because they would cheer Satanico in the feud. Satanico ended up scoring the pin. This match was given almost equal billing, and called the main event as a way to elevate the losing team as being in a pay-per-view main event before a sellout crowd. 6. Universo 2000 pinned Aguayo in 15:55 of a one-fall to a finish mask versus hair match. Mascara Ano 2000 was interfering freely while Ref Tigre Hispano started playing heel and favoring Universo. The most respected ref in the promotion, Roberto Rangel, came out to boot out Hispano for doing the heel bit. Should be noted, with two workers the caliber of Universo and Aguayo, they needed as much storyline as possible to do a singles match this long. Universo went for a tope, but Aguayo moved, and he ended up nailing his brother. Mascara Ano began selling it as injury. Remember, they did already done 2 injuries earlier in the card, one from a tope. The doctor came out and Rangel was also concerned about the injury. At the same time, Hispano was arguing with the commissioners at ringside, in Mexico, due to the sort of credibility factor, although credibility isn't the best word. But it's more important still than WWF. Crew jobs have to at least make plausible sense. With everyone distracted from what was going on, Aguayo made a comeback when someone from the crowd wearing a Pierre Roth Jr. mask threw something in Aguayo's face. Universo used the dreaded and banned Martinete Tombstone Piledriver, which in Mexico is sold as the ultimate move, and got the 3 count. The crowd went nuts, as nobody expected that Aguayo would lose in what was believed to have been his final match ever at the most famous arena in Mexico. Aguayo sold the piledriver, later described in the media after the fact as a dangerous, but not illegal powerbomb on the back of his head and neck, as if he was knocked out, and while still knocked out, his trademark 70s haircut was shaved. He ended up being taken out on a stretcher, which probably sets up his next comeback, because probably even the people's sake of Aguayo dragging out his retirement for so long, and there had started to be a real backlash against him, and his matches hadn't been drawing as well of late, whereas a year ago nearly every place he was appearing was doing big business. Probably don't want their last memory of him with his head shaved being stretchered out. Aguayo stayed in the hospital the entire weekend selling the injuries. Really, he was having plastic surgery on his forehead to take care of 31 years of blade jobs, and even brought his son Pero Jr., who works for the rival AAA promotion, to the hospital, and he canceled his AAA bookings over the weekend to be with his father, which must be a unique booking situation where a star in one promotion cancels bookings to sell an angle for a rival group. I guess that isn't that unusual. Some of the poor WCW guys clinging onto the fantasy world that all the news of the last month was a greatly orchestrated Eric Bischoff work, to believe that. And it shows the power of believing things because of economic necessity above all rational thinking. Had to also believe that people like Jamie Kellner and Vince McMahon would participate in Eric's elaborate work. Aguayo had previously lost 5 hair matches during his career, losing previously to the original El Santo when challenging him for his mask, to El Solitario, one of the 5 biggest stars in Lucha Libre history, when challenging him for his mask, Conan, when he still had a mask, Rey Mendoza and Sandre Chicana. There are 2 lasting impressions after viewing a tape of the Pride 13 show held on March 25th at the Saitama Super Arena. First, can't be emphasized enough the saying that every change of the rules changes the fight. Several fights would have gone entirely different under the old rules, which ban kneeing and kicking a man when standing and the opponent is down. No doubt some would have had different end results as well. Second, and perhaps more important for business, it was clear that Kazushi Sakuraba is the superstar of the promotion. The company is going to be hurt without him for the rest of the year due to his injuries suffered both in this fight and perhaps as a result of fighting too often last year when he was hot. In a sad way, perhaps we'll have a better gauge by the end of this year whether or not Sakuraba was the most valuable wrestler of last year, based on how well Pride holds up in his absence as a comparison point of how well WWF held up without Steve Austin for much of last year, and how well WWF will hold up with Rock working a limited schedule for the next several months of this year. The rule debate is an important one on many levels for a sports entertainment form that is starting to get established in both North America and Japan, where one of the orders of the day in getting it established as a so-called legitimate sport are consistent rules. In its original almost anything goes form, the almost simulated street fight, I was originally against any modification of the rules. Didn't like the gloves being added, stand-ups being ordered when a fight slowed to a crawl on the ground, rounds and elimination of any potential offensive weapons aside from attacking the eyes or fish hooking because of the belief it ruined the purity of the event. At that point, the only place I differed from the purists was on the time limits and judging, because of the reality of holding a sporting event. It simply had to have some form of time limit. Every combat sport had a time limit and judges to rule when it goes the time limit. While the no-time limit Hoist Gracie vs. Kazushi Sakuraba match from last year was voted Match of the Year and will go down historically as an all-time classic, its premise, a rule change because one of the fighters wouldn't fight by existing rules, compromised greatly the integrity of the tournament and the event, even if the end result made for a great series of stories that night. The reality is that some purists, and that's a funny word in hindsight, have to realize for survival, this has to fit into parameters that the general public isn't repulsed by and can accept. And the more rules are in effect, the game can change to where skill becomes more or less important. In hindsight, for survival, the elimination of the headbutts, for example, had to happen, but it did change the game. After seeing Brazilian fights which allowed the so-called field goal kicks of a downed opponent's head, there is no way, both from the potential danger factor and the visual of it, that a move like that being legal will result in this thing lasting in the United States. With UFC going for commission approval and New Jersey in the process of writing a rule book that perhaps will be used nationally as consistent guidelines, there is little chance of this taking place in the United States. The rule was changed back in Japan, allowing those moves, because of the feeling there were too many time limit decisions and boring fights at the December show, even though in the US on pay-per-view it was largely well received. As this card showed, this does shorten fights and lead to conclusive finishes. It also increases the danger in a sport where, for long-term marketability, protecting the drawing card's health as much as possible should be a goal. It's funny, but after watching this for years, my views have changed drastically. I actually enjoy the ring's rules, which ban punching the head from the mount more than UFC rules, because the change in fight by eliminating punches from the mount creates more exciting groundwork and puts more of an emphasis on skill, and those rules created the King of Kings show that we reviewed last week, which was perhaps the best of the modern MMA-style shows because of the skill level displayed and the variety of styles. At the same time, I recognize that for marketability in the United States, because the punch is so basic to the mindset of what a fight is, that eliminating punching from the mount as a legal weapon would kill the sport from a spectator standpoint. In fact, that basic rule may be the stumbling block, because virtually everything in MMA is legal in some sanctioned sport or another, but there is no sport that allows punching someone while on top of him. But without it, it won't work in the United States. Here are some more thoughts on the show, which airs first on April 6th in the US to homes with dishes with several replays, and to all addressable homes in Canada through VC Canada starting on April 13th. I'd give the show a thumbs up, which was virtually the unanimous viewpoint of those in Japan who saw it live. It was by no means the strongest show, but for any kind of a serious fan, it's important to watch largely to examine that rule change and see for yourself what its effect on the fight truly is. For people who like decisive finishes, you got them. But since all but two of the fights were all so short, you didn't get any classic matches. The only real lasting memory were the finishes inspired by the rule, which either makes it a more complete fight than before, or an uglier and less skilled fight, depending upon your point of view. 1. Vitor Belfort over Bobby Southworth. Belfort has added low kicks to his offensive arsenal. He showed his absolutely scary hand speed but never connected on Southworth, and instead decided to wrestle him. He took him down. Southworth momentarily escaped, but Belfort leg tripped him down a second time. Belfort never even tried to punch or knee while on the ground, seemingly realizing he was going to have no trouble in the fight and didn't want to hurt his overmatched opponent. Belfort maneuvered into a choke for the finish. Because it appeared Belfort was taking it easy, it wasn't a good fight. 2. Guy Mezger, 210.1 pounds, knocked out Egan Inoue, 203.5. Inoue didn't want to trade, and tied Mezger up and bowled into the corner. When Mezger finally broke free, he has a good left, a knee, and put him down with a right hook. There wasn't much to the fight except the combinations leading to the knockout finish. Because of the pro wrestling promotion and crowd, the biggest pop was actually Mezger's post-match interview where he challenged Inoue's more famous older brother, Enson, saying that Enson shouldn't have retired and challenging him to a match. Fans popped huge when Mezger issued the challenge. Another huge pop when Enson got into the ring. Enson spoke first in Japanese, then English, saying that he's retired, and if he were to come back, it would be on his own terms, not to respond to a challenge, and that he's got other things going on in life. And then, showing how annoyed he was for being put on the spot in front of such a huge audience with the challenge, he said, "I think this is phone star 1 star." Sohn stared up. Nevertheless, he then went over and shook Mezger's hand. 3. Keith Haring, 238.3, beat Denis Sobolov, 207.0, in 22 seconds with the overhand wristlock submission. Haring came out with a black hat and long black trench coat, and his seconds all dressed alike in kind of the old AWA Long Riders type of outfit for a pro wrestling introduction. Total mismatch both in size and ability, and this was basically a booked squash win for Haring, who everyone recognizes has potential to be one of the top heavyweights in the world. Sobolov was cut over his left eye. 4. Dan Henderson, 194.3, beat Renzo Gracie, 172.7. This was an interesting game where weight played a factor. Pride rules give a man who is 10 kilograms, 22 pounds or more lighter a 1-point advantage in the judging if it goes the distance. Henderson clearly manipulated his weight as heavy as possible without giving up that point. Henderson's win was largely based on the new rules. Gracie wanted him down, but was too small to take down an Olympic-caliber wrestler who had such a size advantage, and because of the size, Gracie couldn't trade with him standing. Under the old rules, Gracie would have shot, and Henderson would have sprawled, but they'd end up on the ground with Gracie on his back, which was where he wanted to be anyway. With these rules, when Gracie shot and Henderson sprawled, he grabbed a front headlock and held the head in place to throw knee after knee until Gracie got his head out of there, so he was unable to stay on the ground and do his game plan. After a sprawl and some knees, and hitting another knee as Gracie got his head out of position, Henderson, while both were pretty much on their knees, hit a strong right to the top of the head that stunned Gracie and a left to the jaw that put him out. While the actual finish would have been legal under the old rules, why they got there was because of the rule change. Antonio Inoki did the first angle. When he called out Kazuyuki Fujita and Kendo Kashin, it is so hilariously similar in tone and crowd pop to Devon, get the table. Huge pop when he called out Shinya Hashimoto. People weren't expecting that. Inoki gave Fujita the original IWGP title belt and then did the trademark slapping the hell out of him. Place went nuts. 5. Mark Coleman, 222.6, beat Alan Goes, 213.4. Goes went up in weight and looked bigger than ever. Coleman came down and was ripped to shreds at his lightest fighting weight ever, probably coming down to avoid having to give up the point. Goes came out and started throwing what are called movie kicks, the kind you see in kung fu movies that nobody would ever do in a real fight against a good opponent, and missed badly with them. Coleman took him down, threw some hard body punches, then started throwing knees to the head. Goes may have been out by the first one, but was definitely out on the second one. He threw a few more before the ref stopped it a little late. Goes was knocked cold, because when he came to, he got up and started fighting, not realizing it was over. Coleman looked furious at that but then recognized it was Goes not realizing it and they hugged. Inoki gave him the Old World Martial Arts title, making the second pro wrestling world title, first being the Rings World Heavyweight title which is pretty well now forgotten since Gilbert Yvel won it from Kiyoshi Tamura and then jumped to this group, to switch from the worked world to the shoot world. 6. Tadao Yasuda, 286.0, won a decision over Masaaki Sadake, 216.7. You could see Sadake coming to the ring thinking this was going to be a cakewalk. Yasuda looked to have lost every bit of 30 pounds, if not more, from his pro wrestling weight, but even then was still fat. As a former sumo star, he took his one strength, the ability to leg drive Sadake where he wanted him, to drive him into the corner and basically bear hug him there forever so Sadake couldn't get distance for his punches. Sadake got a yellow in the first round for grabbing the ropes to avoid a takedown. Yasuda got one a few minutes later for stalling. The ref kept breaking them and restarting them, and Yasuda kept doing the same thing. There was actually a ton of intrigue to the Japanese fans for this match to where they were very patient with it, as it was 8 to 9 minutes in until they started booing. This will play horribly to Americans who won't have that cult favorite and interpromotional angle understanding with Yasuda as a New Japan wrestler doing a shoot against a former K1 star. I'd rate the first round even, as Sadake got a few punches in before Yasuda would trap him, but Yasuda did fight his fight, but did no damage, just avoided taking much damage to the best of his ability. Yasuda, because he was carrying so much weight, looked exhausted at the end of the round while Sadake looked fresh. Same thing in the second round. After one of the breaks, Sadake connected on some punches including a solid one, which stunned Yasuda, but he still put Sadake back in the corner and held on. Crowd was booing as this kept happening. Just at the end of the round, Yasuda got a takedown. Even though Yasuda got a takedown, he did nothing when he got it and Sadake was in the guard, so I'd give the round to Sadake because he did rock Yasuda. Evidently, the judges thought differently. The third round saw the fans boo as the match continued the same way. Really bad. Sadake got away and hit 2 punches before being put back in the corner. Fans booed when it was over. Even if the third round was even, Sadake winning the second round and a point for the weight differential gave him a 2-point win the way I saw it, but Yasuda instead was given a split decision. I think there was the sympathy because it was even and he was such an incredible underdog and did execute his game plan, but his game plan caused no damage. Yasuda cried at the result, actually winning. Inoki came out and boy did he look pissed, because of the crowd reaction, even though his guy won. He called out for Ishizawa, Kashin without the mask. Ishizawa came out wearing the same clothes he had just worn as Kashin, just with no mask. And they did the in-ring angle with Ryan Gracie asking for a revenge match. 7. Trey Teligman 222.2 beat Igor Vovchankin 238.7 in the other huge upset. I didn't think this was the fight of the show, which was the consensus from the reports we received. I should mention that Bill Apter was shown at ringside at the beginning of this fight, which for some reason I found really amusing, kind of looking like a strange man in a strange world. First round saw Igor rock Teligman, tagging him early with powerful punches and hard leg kicks. Teligman was kicked low about 3:49 in, which gave him time to recuperate. When they came back, both started swinging. Good slugfest, but Igor seemed to get the better of it, but Teligman hung in and connected with a jab to the jaw, and Igor was stunned and seemed to slip, and Teligman took him down. Teligman was on top in the guard. Teligman did a little punching from the top but was mainly content to keep him there. I'd give the round even, as Teligman did some offense while on top, but Vovchankin was the stronger of the two on the stand-ups. Second round saw them trade. Teligman connected with a strong punch and a knee and took Igor down in the guard, where the fight stayed for the rest of the round. Teligman's round. Third round saw Igor come out firing, probably recognizing he was behind, but Teligman took him down and basically neutralized him the rest of the way. He didn't try to do anything other than keep him grounded. No real damage, maybe even or a slight edge to Teligman because he at least got a takedown. Teligman deserved the decision, but it wasn't decisive or anything. I guess people liked it because it was such an upset, and when they were standing it was good, but it was mostly on the ground, particularly the last two rounds, and not a lot of action on the ground. 8. Wanderlei Silva 205.7 beat Sakuraba 188.1. Very exciting short fight. Both guys were trading standing, with Silva going all out and Sakuraba trying to counter. Sakuraba's size disadvantage hurt, but the rules spelled the difference. As this game has progressed, they really should match fighters who are within 10 pounds of each other. Silva got big enough to where he wasn't risking a point, but still had a substantial weight edge. As they traded, with both getting shots in, Sakuraba got stunned and Silva threw tons of punches, kicks and knees to Sakuraba's head while Sakuraba kept pressing for a takedown. The knees and kicks, all legal under the new rules, just overwhelmed him, and while he kept shooting, he was bloodied badly and the ref had to stop it. With the old rules, Silva probably would have ended up on the ground, and it would have been a totally different fight. Not saying he wouldn't have won, but no guarantee he would have either. Ray Gedeon, who was the most famous pro wrestling referee in the world during the 1970s, and not only because of his lyrical ring name of Johnny Red Shoes Dugan, passed away on March 26 at the age of 89. He had been suffering from Parkinson's disease and had recently had a bad fall. Gedeon was a fixture for the Los Angeles wrestling promotion from the 1960s until the promotion closed at the end of 1982. He worked into the mid-80s as a referee appointed by the California State Athletic Commission for WWF shows in the market. During the 1970s, the promotion had the closest thing in that era to national exposure, with a weekly Wednesday night time slot on the old Spanish international network of matches from the Olympic Auditorium. The show itself, in syndication on various SIN stations, ran on different nights in different markets in many cities during the traditional Saturday afternoon period that in that era was the popular wrestling time slot, but it aired throughout California live from the Olympic from 8 to 9:30 p.m. on Channel 34 in Los Angeles and Channel 14 in San Francisco. The names like announcer Jimmy Lennon Sr., father of the current famous boxing ring announcer Dugan, and physician Dr. Bernhard Schwartz were all well-known names in virtually every market that had Spanish-language television, from Lennon's classic ring introductions at the beginning of every show. Gedeon, who had retired from the Los Angeles Police Department to become a full-time referee, and his trademark red shoes, were also well-known in Japan, where he was frequently brought in to referee important matches during the early days of New Japan Pro Wrestling due to his aura of authority from being the not just the most famous, and from most accounts the best referee in the world of that era. Probably the only 70s ref who would have been as well known on a worldwide basis was Joe Higuchi, the fixture of All Japan Pro Wrestling, due to it being so strong on network television in that country. As Dugan, he was known for being in tremendous condition for his age, frequently, without being the slightest bit of a showboat, outworking the wrestlers in the match, actually on a more frequent level into the early 80s when the quality of the wrestlers in the Los Angeles circuit was so poor, even though he was into his late 60s by then. While ref bumps in that era were infrequent, as refs played a more serious role in the business in that era, Dugan still took the requisite ref bumps required when the new style of wrestling with the WWF hit at a time when he was already in his early 70s. Dugan refereed some of the most famous matches in history, including the Rikitozen vs. Freddie Blassie series in Los Angeles, which is probably where he got his first mainstream prominence in Japan, as he stopped the match via blood, which gave Blassie the old WWA World Heavyweight title from Rikitozen on July 25, 1962 at the Olympic, which is one of the few singles losses of Rikitozen's career. He refereed virtually all the major matches of the 60s and 70s in Southern California, including the Blassie vs. John Tolos series, which to this day is still the all-time California attendance record for their August 27, 1971 match at the Coliseum, which drew more than 25,000 fans. He also refereed the match where Antonio Inoki first won the NWF World Heavyweight title for the first time on December 10, 1973 in Japan from Johnny Powers, as well as what many consider Inoki's most classic match on December 11, 1975 in defending the title against Billy Robinson, and some of the Inoki vs. Bob Backlund matches as well. Rolando Vera, one of the pioneers of Mexican wrestling and one of its biggest stars of the late 1950s, including a 4-year run holding the NWO World Middleweight Championship, passed away on March 29 after a heart attack at the age of 86. Vera, real name Rolando Versti, a native of Monterrey, won the title from El Santo on October 19, 1956 in his home city and retained it for 4 years before dropping it on October 13, 1960 to protege René Guajardo. At the time, Mexico only had 3 different world titles: the light heavyweight title, which came from the United States and didn't really get popular until the 60s, and the welterweight title. In that era, titles rarely changed hands, so, like the NWO World Heavyweight title in the United States, virtually everyone who held the title became recognized as a legend. Born February 1, 1915, Vera debuted as a pro wrestler in Monterrey at the age of 18, dating back to 1933, which is generally considered by historians as the birth of lucha libre. However, that is, Mexico City history and northern cities close to the American border can trace pro wrestling back far longer. So there was pro wrestling in Monterrey well before that time, but there was no money in it until it got popularized in the 40s. Vera, who was named Most Valuable Player of Mexican Wrestling several times, was best known as the trainer of Blue Demon. The two met in the early 1940s when Vera was already doing lucha libre while working on the railways, where Alejandro Munoz was working, and he trained Munoz in Monterrey and later christened him Blue Demon. He also trained with entire Cito family, including Sugi Cito and his son, Victor Mar, who works as Black Cat for New Japan Pro Wrestling, and also trained Hiroaki Gran Hamada in the early 70s and even trained his daughter Xochitl. Vera held the distinction for being in the main event of the first show at the Ni Arena Mexico on April 27, 1956, teaming with Blue Demon against El Santo and Medico Asesino. He wrestled for nearly 40 years before retiring in the early 1970s. On May 14, 2000 in Monterrey, they had a pro wrestling show in his honor headlined by Mil Mascaras. XFL ratings fell to another new low level of a 2.9 national come this past weekend, with the NBC game doing a 1.8. Based on the Fast Nationals, we don't have the national rating at press time. It was the third straight 1.8 week on the Fast Nationals. 2 weeks ago the actual national number was 1.6. Actually, this did better than expected because the feeling was the NCAA tournament would drive the rating down even more. The UPN game this week set a new low for Sunday night with an 0.7 rating. For all the attempts to justify the ratings based on comparing them to other sports shows in bad time slots, an NBA game on NBC went head-to-head with the XFL on Sunday and drew more than 5 times as many homes and probably 6 times as many viewers. The TNN game did an 0.51 cable rating, which is an 0.40 national rating. Raw on April 2nd, going unopposed the day after WrestleMania, but going against the NCAA basketball finals, drew a 5.67 rating, 5.47 first hour, 5.85 second hour, and an 8.4 share. The Duke-Arizona game drew a 15.6 rating and 24 share. It was the highest rated Raw since the unopposed show on December 11th. The Rock vs. Austin cage match for the WWF title did a 6.42 rating, which was the highest rated match since October 23rd when a 3-way title match with Angle vs. Triple H vs. Rock did a 6.63. Exactly how much of the rating is because it was the day after Mania, and quite frankly, going against the NCAA should negate a lot of that because, and how much is because of lack of Nitro competition should become evident next week. The other big drawing quarter was the Vince and Austin interview at 6.13, picking up a whopping 693,000 viewers from the Rhino vs. Crash match, and the audience dropped 525,000 viewers for Venus vs. Kane. The main event saw a pickup of 1,095,000 viewers from the Shane McMahon interview that preceded it. More people watched the Rock vs. Austin match than the combined viewing audience of Raw and Nitro in most of the past several weeks. The 7.41 million viewers that tuned into Raw as a whole, and the combination of Raw and Nitro has been below that a few times in recent weeks as well, were the most viewers for any show in the 18-year history of TNN. The movie Purgatory on TNT in the old Nitro time slot did a 1.7 rating. SmackDown on March 29 drew a 4.9 rating and 7 share for the first show after the Big Angle and last show before Mania. Very strong number considering the competition included Survivor 16.6, CSI 13.8, Friends 12.1, Millionaire 11.3, and Will and Grace 10.9. The first non-Thunder Wednesday on TBS saw the movie War Games do a 1.8 rating, which is about what the station had been doing for Thunder. For the weekend of March 24th to 25th, Livewire did a 1.0, Superstars did a 1.1, and Heat did a 1.6. The March 27th Galavision Lucha Libre block drew a poor 1.1 rating and only in 0.8 among the target demographic. Observer poll results. Traditional Observer pay-per-view poll results based on phone calls, fax messages and emails to the Observer as of Tuesday, April 3rd. WWF WrestleMania 17. Thumbs up 588, 99.0%. Thumbs down 6, 1.0%. In the middle 0, 0.0%. Best match poll Steve Austin vs. Rock, 157. Edge and Christian vs. Hardys vs. Dudleys, 120. Kurt Angle vs. Chris Benoit, 119. Undertaker vs. Triple H, 42. Worst match poll China vs. Ivory, 278. Gimmick Battle Royal, 61. Kurt Angle vs. Chris Benoit, 12. IATA poll results. Results of the daily poll on the IATA.com website. New questions will be up every day at approximately 3 p.m. Eastern Time, with the results being announced at the start of the Wrestling Observer live internet audio show the following day as well as each week here. What did you think of the final Monday night of competitive wrestling? A. Raw was better 40.0%. B. Nitro was better 48.9%. C. Didn't watch Raw 1.3%. E. Didn't watch Nitro 5.1%. E. Didn't watch Raw or Nitro 4.7%. Who would you hire as lead announcer for WCW? A. Tony Schiavone 21.6%. B. Scott Hudson 34.6%. C. Mike Tenay 22.8%. D. Kevin Kelly 7.4%. Michael Cole 13.6%. If you were Bill Goldberg, would you? A. Negotiate a buyout and sign with the WWF 44.7%. B. Sit and collect your money from Time Warner 55.3%. For back issues of The Observer, the Wrestling Observer Index lists almost every issue in our history going back more than 17 years with the major headlines by the week. Besides as a guide for ordering back issues, the index is also a great way to keep a catalog of past issues and use for historical purposes. It is available for $15 from Grandswarich, 151 Hart Avenue, Peterborough, Ontario, K9J5C5, Canada. Virtually every back issue from 1982-91 is available from him at prices listed plus $5 for postage for overseas orders. Most issues from 1992 present are available from us at $4 per issue. If you are ordering back issues from us, please denote back issues on the envelope to ensure the quickest response. All payments to Grant or to us must be made in U.S. funds. We are also working with Powerbomb Publishing, www.powerbomb.com, to have reissues of some of the most popular Wrestling Observer publications of the past. We have the 200-page book tributes, featuring life stories on Andre the Giant, Bruiser Brody, Junkyard Dog Brian Pillman, Louis Piccoli, Dick the Bruiser, Buddy Rogers, Kerry Von Erich, Fritz Von Erich, Boris Malenko, Art Barr, Eddie Gilbert, John Studd, Ray Stevens, Dick Murdoch, Jerry Graham and others for $25. We have 1987, 1988, 1989 and 1990 Observer yearbooks for $15. We have 1983, 1984, and 1986 Observer yearbooks for $12. We also have the 1986 Wrestling Observer's Who's Who in Wrestling book for $20. For each order, add $4 for postage and handling within North America, $6 for surface mail worldwide, or $14 for airmail overseas. If you are ordering more than one book, you only need to add $1 extra postage per additional book. All payments should be made to Powerbomb at P.O. Box 1523, Scarborough, North Carolina 27510. Wrestling Observer Live airs every Monday through Friday on the ayata.com sports channel on the internet from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time and 2 to 4 p.m. Pacific Time. The show is available live throughout the world, and the most recent show is available 24 hours per day on archives to listen to at your convenience. Brian Alvarez and I open the show every day running down the latest news. We either have guests the remainder of the show taking listeners' phone calls and emails, or we take calls and emails. Even if you don't have access to a computer and just want to talk wrestling, you can reach us between those hours within North America at 1-877-392-3299, 1-800-77-AYATA-99. From outside North America, you can call, collect, and reverse charges by calling an international operator and asking for that number. You can always email questions for the show 24 hours a day to us at davemeltzer@ayata.com. You can always check the WrestlingObserver.com website for the latest guest information. Upcoming guests include Donovan Morgan on April 6th, Ken Shamrock on April 10th, author Carl Stern on April 11th, Shelton Benjamin on April 12th, and Bruno Sammartino on April 18th. There is no show due to Good Friday on April 13th. We're also on almost every Saturday night at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time and every Sunday at midnight on Talk 640 in Toronto for Wrestling Observer Extra as part of the live audio Wrestling with Jeff Marek and Dan Lavronsky. We also have late-breaking news headlines on WrestlingObserver.com, which also includes television reviews and columns written by Brian Alvarez and Alex Merves. February business comparisons. World Wrestling Federation. Estimated average attendance February 11,842. Estimated average attendance February 1st 10,462, minus 11.7%. January 2001 12,263. Estimated average gate February $321,816. Estimated average gate February 1st $303,826, minus 5.6%. January 2001 $401,133. Own Star. Percentage of house shows sold out February 68.4. Percentage of house shows sold out February 1st 41.2. January 2001 62.5. Average Monday night rating February 5.80. Average Monday night rating February 1st 4.94, minus 14.8%. January 2001 5.14. Major show February No Way Out, 12,551 sellout /451, $625 est 1.20 buy rate est. $5.80 million pay-per-view revenue. Major show February 1st No Way Out, 15,223 sellout /13,119 paid $683,955 est. 1.31 buy rate est. $6.92 million pay-per-view revenue est. Buy rate plus 9.2% est. Overall event revenue plus 21.6%. World Championship Wrestling. Estimated average attendance February 3,567. Estimated average attendance February 1st 2068, minus 42.0%. January 2001 2,342. Estimated average gate February $85,372. Estimated average gate February 1st $51,483, minus 39.7%. January 2001 $63,823. Percentage of house shows sold out February 0.0. Percentage of house shows sold out February 1st 0.0. January 2001 0.0. Average Monday night rating February 2.90. Average Monday night rating February 1st 2.14, minus 26.2%. January 2001 2.35. Major show February Super Brawl 8, 569 fifths, 538 paid $177,324 est. 0.15 buy rate est. $708,000 pay-per-view revenue. Major show February 1st Super Brawl 4, 935 thirds, 105 paid/87,133 $0.15 buy rate/est. $792,000 pay-per-view revenue est. Buy rate plus 0.0% est. Overall event revenue minus 8.6%. All Japan Pro Wrestling. Estimated average attendance February 00 2,865. Estimated average attendance February 1st 1,593, minus 44.4% January 2001 1,606. Estimated average gate February 00 $121,350. Estimated average gate February 1st $48,200, minus 60.3% January 2001 $64,912. Percentage of house shows sold out February 00 20.0. Percentage of house shows sold out February 1st 28.6. January 2001 37.5. New Japan Pro Wrestling. Estimated average attendance February 00 3,657. Estimated average attendance February 1st 3,442, minus 5.9% January 2001 4,500. Estimated average gate February 00 $169,700. Estimated average gate February 1st $155,503, minus 8.4% January 2001 $245,000. Percentage of house shows sold out February 00 35.7. Percentage of house shows sold out February 1st 30.0. January 2001 100.0. Average television rating February 00 3.65. Average television rating February 1st 2.45, minus 32.9% January 2001 4.68. Pro Wrestling Noah. Estimated average attendance February 1st 2,109. January 2001 2,475. Estimated average gate February 1st $67,490. January 2001 $139,358. Percentage of house shows sold out February 1st 63.6. January 2001 40.0. Mexico. La Parca Jr. won the annual Rey de Reyes tournament on March 30th in Ciudad Madero, which is one of AAA's annual big shows of the year. In the four-way final over heavy metal, Hector Garza and Abismo Negro, after all four had previously that evening won four-way elimination matches. Los Vipers kept the Mexican national Atomic Osh four-man titles over the Black family. Garza was apparently injured in the four-way. The April 6th Tijuana show is the biggest of the year with the El Hijo del Santo vs. Nicho Psicosis, Mask vs. Hair match, plus Rey Mysterio Jr. vs. Juventud Guerrera for the newly created IWC Cruiserweight title, and Mil Mascaras and La Parca and Super Parca vs. Rey Mysterio Sr., and Halloween and Damien, as well as Mascara Sagrada and Solar and Tinieblas Jr. vs. Silver King and Superboy and El Hijo del Diablo. Actually, that title belt that Mysterio Jr. and Juvie are battling over was an indie belt from Northern California promoter Kirk White, who gave Juvie his Cruiserweight belt. Juvie isn't working for the company any longer, so put it up as a new belt in Mexico this weekend. There may be problems with Mysterio Jr. appearing because WCW isn't allowing any of its wrestlers, while they are paying them now, work any outside dates except for those people whose contracts specifically allow it, and Mysterio Jr. isn't on the list. Ultimo Guerrero and Rey Bucanero retained the CMLL tag titles in the long-awaited rematch with Negro Casas and Olympico on April 1st at Arena Coliseo in Mexico City, when Casas submitted cleanly at the 23 minutes mark. At this show, all the wrestlers on the card came to the ring to pay tribute to Rolando Vera. With Aguayo selling his injury, the March 31st Zacatlan show ended up being a three-way with Santo vs. Blue Panther vs. Wagner Jr., which was said to have been fantastic, ending with Santo out first and Panther getting an armbar submission on Wagner. April 6th Arena Mexico main event has the return of Gigante Silva teaming with Atlantis and Brazo de Plata against Apollo Dantes and Los Hermanos Dinamita, plus a four-team trios tournament with Negro Casas and Felino and Lismark Jr., Safari and Olympico and Mr. Niebla, Emilio Charles Jr. and Scorpio Jr. and Bestia Salvaje and El Satanico and Dr. Wagner Jr. and Shocker. Negro Navarro returned to EMMLL this past week to team with 70s and 80s partner El Signo. Puerto Rico, Ray Gonzalez beat El Bronco on March 31st in Carolina, Puerto Rico before 500 fans to win the Universal title for the 12th time. IWA's anniversary tour, billed as Juicio Final, or Final Judgment Day, will be this coming weekend with shows on April 5th in Manatí, April 6th in Guayama, April 7th in Bayamon, and April 8th in San German. Kane and Terry Funk will be the major attractions on the tour. April 5th show is headlined by TNT Savio Vega, also known as Hombre Dinamita on television, although he's called TNT at the arenas because the TNT name is more famous from the glory days of Puerto Rican wrestling when he was the young babyface superstar under Carlos Colon, but the rival WWC promotion has television rights to the name, and Huracan Castillo Jr. vs. Chicky Star and Victor the Bodyguard in a double Caribbean strap match, and TV announcer Hugo Savinovich and Kane vs. Farhan Zarux and Angel. Funk wrestles Super Crazy in a hardcore match while long since retired Steve DeSalvo returns as Steve Strong. He was a top heel against Colon in the 80s under that name, against Apollo. Essa Rios vs. Gangrel is also on the show, plus Taka Michinoku is on the tour. April 6th as Savinovich and Kane and Shane vs. Star and Victor and Ricky Banderas, Castillo vs. Strong and TNT vs. Funk in a hardcore match, Rios vs. Apollo and Michinoku vs. Crazy. April 7th as TNT and Shane and Castillo and Apollo and Kane vs. Star and Victor and Banderas and Zarux and Strong in a cage match, Savinovich and Kane vs. Star and Strong, Banderas vs. Shane for the IWA title in a ladder match, TNT vs. Strong, Castillo vs. Funk for the IWA Hardcore title, and Crazy vs. Rios vs. Michinoku for Crazy's IWA Junior title, as well as a match for the commissionership with Dutch Mantle, Booker Jose Estrada Sr., the original WWF jobber from the late 70s and early 80s who is best known in 1978 as the guy Tatsumi Fujinami first beat to become WWF Junior champ, and Heriberto Lopez. April 8th doesn't have Kane, as he's got WWF commitments. Top matches: Banderas vs. Shane in February 3rd falls for the IWA title, TNT and Castillo vs. Star and Victor in a cage match, Apollo vs. Funk, Vizago, Brett Sanders vs. Strong, Michinoku vs. Gangrel and Crazy vs. Rios. WWC is running on April 7th in nearby Carolina, with a one-night tournament billed as the Majors Cup. Instead of bringing in big names to compete that weekend, they're doing no fly-ins at all and lowering prices dirt cheap, to $5 for adults and $2 for children. IWA is charging $35 and $45 for its tickets. Ratings for last week saw WWC on March 24th do a 12.8, IWA did a 9.3 and WWF did an 8.7, and on March 25th WWC did a 12.2 and IWA did a 9.1. All Japan business picked up this past week as some of the bigger carnival matches took place, including the biggest match of the tour where Toshiaki Kawada pinned Genichiro Tenryu, who has been working with a bad neck. Tenryu missed the March 29th show due to re-aggravated his chronic neck injury. Standings as of April 4th in the tournament were: number 1. Taiokia, 5 wins, no losses, and 1 draw, 11 points. Number 2. Toshiaki Kawada, 5 wins, 1 loss, and no draws, 10 points. Number 3. Tenryu, 5 wins, 1 loss, and 1 draw, 11 points. Mike Barton, 4 wins, 1 loss, and no draws, 8 points. Steve Williams, 4 wins, 2 losses, and no draws, 8 points. Johnny Smith, 2 wins, 3 losses, and 1 draw, 5 points. Yoshiaki Fujiwara, 2 wins, 4 losses, and 1 draw, 5 points. George Hines, 1 win, 5 losses, and no draws, 2 points. Jim Steele, 1 win, 6 losses, and no draws, 2 points. Mitsuya Nagai, no wins, 6 losses, and no draws, 0 points. Each wrestler will end up with 9 matches, with everything playing out this week, and the finals on April 11th in Sendai. In an effort to throw some intrigue into the Champion Carnival, Kawada was pinned by Barton in 16-12 with a powerbomb on the March 29th show in Chiba. The other matches saw Smith pin Naga in 14 minutes with a reverse DDT and Kia pin Fujiwara in 7:57 with a Hawaiian Crusher. March 31st in Nagaoka before a sellout 3,350 was the biggest show of the tour, with Kawada pinning Tenryu in 8:17 with a running high kick. They had done a weird angle where Tenryu said that he would lose to Kawada ahead of time because he wanted to defend the Triple Crown against Kawada, and the only way that would happen is if Kawada beat him in the Carnival match. Also on the show was the biggest win of Kia's career as he turned the Williams Dr. Bomb into a Hurricane Rana in 1835. Also, Fujiwara beat Steele with his trademark Fujiwara armbar in 9:06 and Smith pinned Hines in 17:25. April 1st in Kanazawa drew a sellout of 2,800 largely because Hiroshi Hazi, who is the local representative in the Japanese Diet Senate, did a rare match in his home area teaming with Fujiwara over Barton and Masafuchi in 22-14 when Hazi pinned Fuchi with his trademark Northern Lights suplex. In the tournament matches on that show, Steele pinned Hines to take his first win, Williams pinned Nagai in 4-13 with the Dr. Bomb, Kawada pinned Smith in 22-39 with a power bomb, and Tenryu went to a 30-minute draw with Kia. April 3rd in Takayama before 1050 saw Hines pin Nagai, Barton pinned Steele, Fujiwara went to a 30-minute draw with Smith, and Tenryu pinned Williams in 10-28 after a lariat. After the April 14th show headlined by Kawada vs. Muto, the next Budokan show will be June 8th. Pro Wrestling Noah. The one-hour television special which airs on April 6th was taped on April 1st in Fukuoka, drawing a half-house of 3,800 fans at the Kakusai International Center for the Jun Akiyama vs. Takao Mori match, which Akiyama won in 22-49 via pinfall after a one-handed exploder suplex. This was the rematch of their match in last year's All Japan Champion Carnival where they did the big shock of Mori scoring a pin in a record 7 seconds. Actually, that match is misleading, as the two started brawling, and it really went closer to 25 seconds. They just hit the bell to open the match right as they were going for the finish in order to set a record. Unlike in American wrestling, where they just make up times, because Japan is more credible, the times listed are always exact bell-to-bell times. The other television matches were Vader pinning Takuma Sano in 10:01 after a choke slam, Mitsuharu Misawa and Yoshinari Ogawa over Namichi Marufuji and Takeshi Rikyo when Ogawa pinned Marufuji, and Akira Tao pinning Takeshi Morishima with the Nadawa. The big angle shot on the first TV show was Ogawa turning on Misawa after winning the tag match and giving him an Enzui-jiri. It's still strange to me watching Noah because it's the old Baba guys who almost never did angles, and didn't face heel, doing American angles and heel psychology. So the premise of the first, and thus most important, TV show was to give the people the great match on top, a strong win for Vader, best foreign draw. Misawa was in there with the hottest young worker for the match and then was turned on by his longtime partner. The new guys who will either carry or fail to carry the company in the future if people get into their elevation story or not. Marufuji, Rikyo, and Morishima all were with the top guys but lost. In Japan, the losing is okay because everyone knows it's part of a long-term tease, and at this point them just being in the ring with those guys on television and performing well will elevate them. March 29th in Kagoshima saw a minor upset as Daisuke Ikeda pinned Tamon Honda. This puts Ikeda in the sacrificial lamb spot for Vader on April 6th. Another upset on March 30th in Kumamoto as Kentaro Shiga pinned 2 Cold Scorpio in 13:06 to go into the second round against Yoshihiro Takayama. Takashi Sugawara took his first singles win on March 30th over Pitbull, Gary Wolfe. On April 2nd in Beppu in the tournament, Rikyo pinned Morishima, which sets up Rikyo no doubt losing to Akiyama on April 8th. On April 3rd in Uejima, Takayama pinned Shiga, which puts Takayama as the first guy in the Final Four, and he'll wrestle the Vader Ikeda winner. Any guess who that will be? On April 12th. The other semifinal looks to be Misawa vs. Akiyama on April 11th, with the championship match on April 15th at the Ariake Coliseum. They are trying to put some intrigue into Misawa vs. Ogawa on April 4th, with the idea that Ogawa has a plan to fight outside the ring and cause a countout finish to eliminate Misawa. They haven't done a countout finish ever in Noah, and in all Japan you'd have to go back to the early 90s, and even that was a conclusive finish for a Tao Kawada match where Kawada lost via countout but did a stretcher job, so a fluke ending, and guaranteed the fans will be furious, and it's not the good kind of heat. New Japan. It was announced that both Kensuke Sasaki vs. Shinya Hashimoto and Kazuyuki Fujita vs. Scott Norton on April 9th at the Osaka Dome will be no-rules matches that can only have a decisive finish. Norton vs. Fujita is now an IWGP heavyweight title match with the winner, probably Fujita, getting both the original belt and the current New Japan belt. There are no pinfalls being counted in the match, which can only end via submission, knockout or ref or doctor stoppage due to injury. Antonio Inoki claimed that Hulk Hogan had called him and wanted to wrestle him at a Tokyo Dome show. Considering Inoki's credibility is on par with Hogan's in that they both live in the full-time working world, you can dismiss this, except given the timing in Hogan's mind, it makes perfect sense. Hogan isn't doing anything and is probably caught in such a time war where he thinks he and Inoki is still a Tokyo Dome main event. It's funny because when Hogan went back to Japan in 1993 and the whole world had changed since he was a regular up through 1984, He just assumed it was the same country he left and to this day thinks Inoki is the top guy, which in a sense as a legend, he still is, but doesn't realize he himself can't be anything more than a nostalgia act. No different from people like Terry Funk, Mil Mascaras, Stan Hansen, Tiger Jeet Singh or Abdullah the Butcher, who were the big foreign stars the same time he was. They are running bigger than usual shows for Korakuen Hall when they start the next tour on April 19th and April 20th due to Tokyo having big shows with a Keiji Muto vs Toshiaki Kawada match on April 14th for All Japan and then 01 doing the pay-per-view on April 18th. The April 19th show has Muto vs Jushin Liger and Riki Choshu and Manabu Nakanishi and Yuji Nagata and Yutaka Yoshi vs Masahiro Chono and Scott Hall and Hiro Saito and Satoshi Kojima, and April 20th has two interpromotional matches with Osaka Pro with El Samurai vs Super Delphin and Minoru Tanaka defending the IWGP Junior title against Takahiro Murahama. Both Jinsei Shinzaki and Taiyo Kiya will appear as part of Muto's Bat team on this tour. Muto is trying to recruit Liger to his team as well as bring in Hayabusa from FMW. Muto said that after his match with Kawada on April 14th, he wants a match with Tenryu for the Triple Crown and to defend the Triple Crown on New Japan shows. The annual Best of the Super Junior tournament takes place in May, and they are going to have to do something about it to keep it from being dead. Koji Kanemoto will be out due to his shoulder surgery and Shinjiro Otani and Tatsuhiro Takaiwa are out because they've joined 01. The only big stars if they don't bring new people in are Liger and Tanaka. March 17th TV did a 2.6 rating and March 24th did a 2.2. Other Japan notes. FMW announced the lineup for its May 5th Kawasaki Stadium show called Kawasaki Legend 2001. The stadium itself, which held about 52,000 fans and FMW had sold it out in the past for the Atsushi Onita vs Genichiro Tenryu match on May 5, 1994, is either being rebuilt or has been torn down, and this show will actually be held on what was the site of the stadium, which is now a large parking lot, so it isn't like they are going to be drawing that kind of a crowd. Main event is a 15,000-volt octagon cage electric dynamite thunderbolt death match with Great Sasuke and Hayabusa vs Tetsuhiro Kuroda and Mr. Ganasuke. Also Koto Fuyuki vs Genichiro Tenryu with former wrestler Ashura Hara as referee. Back in the late 1980s, Tenryu, Hara, Fuyuki and Toshiaki Kawada formed a group called Revolution in All Japan, and Tenryu and Hara were a main All Japan tag team for several years. In a match to decide the vacant Woo tag titles, Komon, Koji Nakagawa, and Onryo face Super Crazy and Nova, ECW. Also Mammoth Sasaki defends the Woo Hardcore title that he won on April 1st at Korakuen Hall against former champ Kentaro Kanemura. A women's tag match has Kyoko Inoue and Emi Motokawa against the Urgent team of Ayako Hamada and Akino. In a boxing match, wrestler Shinjuku Same faces a mystery boxer who they are billing as a former world boxing champion. Azusa Kudo and Naohiko Yamazaki and Karuko Arai, who does the gimmick as being the daughter of Shoichi Arai, the owner, similar to a Stephanie McMahon, and Osoroshi Gorilla, indie wrestler from Saitama Pro Wrestling, versus Hiskatsu Oya and Flying Kid Ichihara and professional woman singer Tomomi Tamamoto, Oya's valet in Survival Tobita at Saitama Pro Wrestling. In an 8-person match, Ricky Banderas defends the IWA Heavyweight title, Puerto Rico against Chocoball Mukai. In the opener is Riki Fuji and Osamu Mukita versus Tomoazu Morita and Yoshito Sasaki. The working idea for the 01 pay-per-view on April 18th are to have 2 tag matches as main events, one of which will have Shinya Hashimoto and Tadao Yasuda versus Tamon Honda and Masao Inoue of Noah, which is a weak match for Hashimoto on pay-per-view, and the other to have Naoya Ogawa and Kazunari Murakami as a team. Singles matches announced are Takashi Sugawara versus Alexander Otsuka, Tatsuhito Takaiwa versus Namichimaru Fuji, a great match on paper, and Shinjiro Otani versus Sean McCulley, which unless it is changed like it was the first time, is a total waste of Otani. The basic feeling at this point is that unless they reach an agreement with Misawa to work these tag team matches, or get cooperation from New Japan, they have no show. The third 01 show on June 14th at Osaka Castle Hall is being advertised as a combination pro wrestling and martial arts fighting show. It is believed that Muto, Jinsei Shinzaki and Taiyo Kiya from BAT would appear on the April 18th show, but Hiroshi Hazi of BAT has already said he won't because the legislature will be back in session. In a build-up for this show, Inoki on April 3rd said he wanted Misawa to agree to do singles matches against both Hashimoto and Riki Choshu, as well as Naoya Ogawa. Misawa and Ogawa shot an angle at the March 2nd 01 pay-per-view but haven't done anything with it. Inoki also said that he wants to create a division of challengers for Mark Coleman's World Martial Arts title, which would include Don Fry, Gary Goodridge, Brian Johnston and would like to get Bill Goldberg in for that group. Ogawa said that he was asked to do the April 9th Osaka Dome show but said he would instead work the April 18th 01 show. April 14th Battlers at Korakuen Hall will have Atani and Takaiwa vs. Otsuka and Junji.com. Kuroda won the Wu heavyweight title from Fuyuki in 1902 using the Ganisu clutch, and Sasaki won the hardcore belt from Kanemura on the April 1st Korakuen Hall show. Rings on April 20th at Tokyo Yoyogi Gym has announced Kiyoshi Tamura vs. Jim Gustavo of Brazil, Jeremy Horn vs. Yuri Bekshev of Russia, and Rishi Yanagisawa vs. Bobby Hoffman. All Japan Women also ran April 1st at Korakuen Hall with a main event where Yumiko Hata and Manami Toyota and Mima Shimoda beat Kaoru Ito and Tomoko Watanabe and Momoe Nakanishi in 27-29. Atsushi Onita and Masato Tanaka were reunited as a tag team on April 1st on an Onita show in Suez. Onita and Tanaka teamed with another former FMW wrestler, Hideki Hasaka, as well as Naoshi Sano over Shoji Nakamaki and Masayoshi Motegi and Shinigami and Toshiyuki Moritani in the usual street fight main event. Geto and Jado, who left FMW with Tanaka, also worked this show. Big Japan is doing a one-week deathmatch tournament from April 27th to May 6th with the finals at the Kawasaki City Gym with Justice Payne, Madman Pondo, John Zandig, Wife Beater, Jun Kasai, Kamikaze, Shadow WX, Winger, Kentaro Kanemura from FMW, and Abdullah Jr. Kobayashi. AJW is running a big show on May 4th in Kawasaki with a no-rules match with Kaoru Ito vs. Yumiko Hata as the main event, plus Nani Takahashi and Momoe Nakanishi defend the WWWA tag titles against Atsuko Mita and Mima Shimoda. Here and there. Benny McCrary, who was something of a celebrity during the 1970s for his frequent mentions in the Guinness Book of World Records as being one of the world's fattest twins with brother Billy, passed away on March 28 in his home in Hendersonville, North Carolina at the age of 54. The McCrary twins, who at their peak both weighed nearly 800 pounds, gained a lot of freakish publicity in the 70s for their size during the era before Andre the Giant hit it big when really fat guys like Haystacks Calhoun were big attractions in pro wrestling. They were given a lit bit of training by Gory Guerrero in El Paso and booked as pro wrestlers. They were never major stars in pro wrestling, where they later changed their name to the more easily pronounced McGuire twins, because aside from their gimmick of going into small towns riding motorcycles which used to garner the local newspaper publicity at a time when newspapers rarely covered wrestling, there was nothing to them. Because of their size, they couldn't even go more than 5 minutes standing up without having to sit down, so working wrestling matches for any length of time was impossible, which limited their marketability, and they really never worked any length of time in the major territories. Unlike Calhoun, who had a modicum of ring psychology and a few trademarked fat man spots in a patterned match and became a big name and draw in his day, the twins couldn't do much and didn't last very long. Their most famous match was a handicap match where as a tag team they faced Antonio Inoki in Japan in the early days of New Japan Pro Wrestling around 1974, trying to take advantage of the fact that some people remembered Rikito's and versus Calhoun matches, which were horrible, but remembered fondly anyway because of Calhoun's size. They gained publicity more when they both got married on the same day. Billy died in 1979. With the possible exception of Rodney Inouye at his heaviest, Benny was probably the heaviest man ever to compete in pro wrestling. The Guinness Book used to list William J. Cobb, Happy Humphrey, at 802 pounds as the heaviest pro wrestler, but any look at photos of Humphrey would show that Inouye and McCrary were much heavier than he was. Oswald Ozzy Timmons, a longtime wrestler, referee, writer and historian of pro wrestling, passed away on March 12 at the age of 81 after being hospitalized the previous 2 months due to kidney and heart failure. Timmons wrestled and later refereed in Canada's Maritime provinces, starting wrestling in 1946 and retiring as a referee in 1972. He remained a huge fan of wrestling, serving as commissioner for one of the indie groups in New Brunswick until a few years ago and writing articles regularly for the Whatever Happened To newsletter, as well as being a longtime reader of this publication. Jack Wilson, a native of Milwaukee who wrestled as Hans von Schupp and Kurt von Bronner, not the more famous Kurt von Bronner who passed away many years ago, passed away on March 13 of natural causes at the age of 82. Wilson had signed a contract in 1943 to play with the Green Bay Packers but ended up serving in World War II. He started wrestling in 1954, losing as a TV jobber in 1 minute to Hans Schmidt, at the time one of wrestling's greatest attractions, in his first match in Chicago. He was never a full-time wrestler, but continued to do so until the age of 62 when he was exiting a truck and fell into a ditch, tearing his rotator cuff. Dusty Rhodes announced that he would be doing a Turnbuckle Championship Wrestling pay-per-view after getting television in the fall. He said he would work with Howard Brody and Turnbuckle would become an NWA group and talked about doing a NWA Promotions national tour using Rhodes vs. Ric Flair as a headline attraction, although Flair's WCW contract would likely nix that happening. As far as pay-per-view goes, it's tough. ECW's next to last pay-per-view did about an 0.1 buy rate. The last one actually did quite a bit better, and WCW's last pay-per-view with Rhodes and Flair as the big angle also did about an 0.1. And those aren't profitable numbers. All attempts at non-name brand pay-per-view shows like WOW, iGeneration and Heroes of Wrestling were flops at the box office. Galavision is considering adding the 1-hour AAA Extreme show to its lineup on Monday nights. Because of the nature of television, I don't think they were even aware it would be going head-up with Raw, and I'm also not sure they really draw from much of the same audience. When checking out the results of the latest census, particularly in California, it seems to speak volumes about where the next alternative wrestling product should come from. California is now 35% Latino. Nationally, that figure is 12.5%. This isn't to say that means they are all going to be Lucha Libre fans, because second-generation Latinos in America are far more likely to be WWF fans, but it does point to future marketing of a divergent wrestling product as well as the value of featuring stars from that group as potential drawing cards since that culture has more of a historical interest in pro wrestling. That doesn't mean putting Latinos on in the undercard, because WCW did that and drew no money with them. An ethnic draw is only an ethnic draw when put in a superstar position. Ethnic draws have been huge in boxing for years, but it's only the superstar boxers that draw. Just putting unknown fighters with ethnic surnames and limited ability doesn't draw anyone, just as filling a roster with Latino names won't draw any Latino fans if those wrestlers are just there for humiliation. They introduced a new large heel as of yet without a name, to feud with Jerry Lawler on Power Pro on March 31st. The promotion seems to be built around Lawler and the returning Ali. They've also brought back Ernest Angel, a manager from the 80s who did a heel evangelist gimmick where he hit people with a Bible as his foreign object. Juventud Guerrera is being negotiated with for CZW in May. XPW won't use him anymore, apparently because he wasn't willing to put someone over. Speaking of XPW, they have the Olympic Auditorium booked on April 21st, which is the same date that AAA had announced. Being that AAA is known for announcing things before they happen, things like this happen. Former WCW prelim wrestler Harrison Norris, who wrestled as Hardbody Harrison, won the national finals of the Tough Man contest that was taped for FX. Norris is one of the wrestlers who filed suit against WCW and Time Warner for racial discrimination. Those who have seen him on the Tough Man show note that he does have great charisma on that show. Rob Van Dam over Nova headlined the March 30th show for GCW in Florissant, Missouri before 300 fans. Combat Zone Wrestling on April 4th in Dover, Delaware at Froggy's Bar was headlined by John Zandig vs. Tommy Dreamer for their heavyweight title. Add Rob Van Dam to the list of wrestlers with a wrestling school, as Van Dam has gotten a location in Southern California and is now just working on at what point he'll open up. Silly press release of the week comes from Tokyo Pop, the company that markets the FMW videos in the US, which have actually done very well, even with the fake storyline commentary that ruins it for anyone who is actually a wrestling fan. Citing possible violations of the Sherman Antitrust Act, they claim they fear the WWF's purchase of WCW would impede the number of options available to consumers. No question that is true. They said they have no illusions about going to court on this subject, but instead, stated they want to settle the problems in the ring in a death match. Sandman vs. Madman Pondo headlines the IWA show on April 7th in Charlestown, Indiana. Dusty Rhodes brought longtime tag team partner Manny Fernandez to the Turnbuckle Championship Wrestling show on March 31st in Seagrove, North Carolina at the elementary school. Americans in England right now are Nova coming for the April 21st FWA show in Horwick, England, while Jim Neidhart and Shin, David Ashford Smith, who has also wrestled under names like Chris Champion and Yoshi Kwan, are working for Hammerlock. There was a benefit show over the weekend in Bangor, Maine for Sean Davis, an 18-year-old who wrestled under the name Devastation and held the Rampage Pro Wrestling Cruiserweight title, who suffered a broken neck doing a shooting star press in training that may affect his mobility permanently. Davis, who said he'd practiced the move many times, jumped too far out and not up enough and landed on his head, and was numb from the neck down. He'd fractured the C3 and C4 vertebrae and crushed a disc a few weeks ago. He underwent 7 hours of spinal surgery on March 6, fusing the vertebrae. Doctors said they didn't know if he'll ever be able to walk again, although he's made remarkable progress and took his first steps 15 days later and says he'll be back in the ring. All of the prospective wrestlers in the group were told to keep the injury quiet for fear of newspaper publicity under orders from trainer Ken Banks. However, two of the students told the local paper about the injury and that Banks had told them to keep quiet. However, Davis's condition was posted in the school internet site where the fundraiser was taking place. Banks later talked about it, saying he was afraid of what would happen if word got out a student broke his neck at his wrestling school. XPW has the April 21st date at the Olympic Auditorium, which AAA had on television announced it would have. AAA has announced dates so many times before booking buildings that you'd think they would figure it out by now. Anyway, appearing on the XPW show are Sabu, New Jack, Vic Grimes, John Cronus, and they are billing Conan, although because he's under contract to WCW still, I don't know if that one is going to happen. MMA. Naoto Morishita announced that they were looking at doing a Sakuraba vs Wanderlei Silva rematch in July when Sakuraba has recovered from all his medical problems. Sakuraba isn't due out of the hospital until about April 10th, and July may be rushing things. Pancrase ran on March 31st in Osaka, drawing a sellout 2,800 to the Namihai Dome, with Yuki Kondo beating Brian Gasaway in 2:45 with a leg lock, one of the main events. Kondo after the match said that he wanted a rematch with Tito Oritz, who beat him on the December 16th UFC show in about 2 minutes, in Tokyo. Masami Ozaki, Pancrase president, said he would do everything he could to get Kondo a rematch with Ortiz. Due to the quick first match, even though it was about as exciting in 2 minutes as you're going to get and Kondo did knock Ortiz down with a knee and momentarily seemed on the verge of winning, it really doesn't appear to be a match in the cards for UFC. The other main event saw Paulo Filho win a unanimous decision over Ikuiza Minowa. Kengo Watanabe, a former college rugby star who, because of his charisma, they wanted to build into a top star, except that he can't seem to win his matches, although he did have a very even draw once with Jeremy Horn, was knocked out in 3:23 by former UFC fighter Tim Lasik. K1's next show is April 15th at the new ACA Dome in Kumamoto, doing a best of 5 Japan versus the World gimmick, which, quite frankly, Japan is clearly the underdog in at least the top 2 matches, with Ernesto Hoost versus Musashi and Nob Hayashi versus Peter Aerts. K1 will be doing its Japanese Grand Prix tournament on June 24th in Sendai, with the finals on August 19th at the Saitama Super Arena. Advertising out for the May 4th UFC lists the name of the show as Fully Loaded, which is also the name of the WWF's annual July pay-per-view. Coliseum 2001 officials went to Los Angeles this week to try and close the deal for a Rickson Gracie versus Naoya Ogawa later this year. WWF. The reality of the WCW situation hit a little harder on March 28th with the final staff meeting, held at the power plant. Basically, the entire workforce was let go in one fell swoop. About 120 of the 140 were let go at the meeting and asked to clear out their offices by the end of the day, turn in their cell phones, pages and company credit cards, as well as anything that was Time Warner property. Their computers were already shut down when they got to the office, and all the locks on the door had been changed. Security guards were watching as they were given boxes to clean out their belongings by the end of the day, and security checked everyone as they departed from the facility. They were given 9 weeks severance pay, as well as in addition 4 weeks for every year of service to the company, which is a pretty generous package. The ones that weren't let go immediately, including Diana Myers, head of legal, Aaron Blitzstein, head of marketing, and Rob Garner, head of advertising and syndication, were given an additional 30 days to help making a smooth transition, as well as some people who work underneath them. Johnny Ace also fits into that category, and he is currently working as the liaison between the WWF and the former WCW talent that is no under contract to WWF. The rest of the agents and bookers were let go, such as Terry Taylor, Ed Ferrara, Vince Russo, Bill Banks, pending the expiration of their respective deals and how their contracts are structured. Kevin Sullivan, who hasn't been used since being demoted 1 year ago, had his contract recently roll over at $300,000 for 1 more year. Of that group, only Taylor appears to have any reasonable shot at being hired by WWF. Someone from Human Resources at the WWF told everyone that if they were willing to relocate to Stamford, Connecticut, they could apply for a job with WWF and given a form to fill out. They were told if they filled out the form they would be contacted by WWF if they wanted them, within 30 to 60 days. The general feeling seemed to be that the employees were surprised at just how cold the send-off was, and also a lot of people complained that Brad Siegel never even came to the meeting to face people. One longtime company employee noted that he didn't even recognize probably 2/3 of the people at the meeting, and recognized that people in the company had no idea what was going on. When names were read off of employees given their various termination notices, Tony Schiavone, who if nothing else is a name people working in the company should know, when his name was read off by the people at HR in WCW, they said Tony Schiavone, pronounced like the old Chris Jericho spoof on his name. Siegel is getting a lot of the blame as being perhaps the main culprit, although there were many, in the destruction of the company. There was tremendous heat because the employees were never told what was going on. They were assured when first reports came out about the sale that Turner had no interest in selling the company. Siegel had always maintained, even to the wrestlers, that the company wasn't so much looking to sell as much as listening to offers, and that if a sale wasn't completed, they were not contemplating shutting it down, even though clearly they had no intention of keeping the company going once the America Online merger would go through. Certainly he made a lot of very bad decisions, which may have been apropos for the Turner regime. If there is one thing, and there is a lot more than one thing, that a case study of WCW should show, it is that pro wrestling is a unique business and that you can't be successful in it without a great deal of product knowledge. If you have no product knowledge, you'll have no idea what fans want, and you'll also be swerved by all the carnies who are in it for their own self-interest. Vince's big advantage is that he's been around those same carnies since being a teenager and was taught the ropes by his dad, who spent a lifetime manipulating those same carnies instead of being manipulated by them. The first WCW television show at this point is scheduled to air on May 12 on TNN from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. The plan is to begin adding weekly Wednesday night shows, which will be tapings for that TNN show starting on May 9th in Trenton, New Jersey. These dates are both tentative at this point. There are no further plans regarding the shows. At this point there are no plans to use WWF talent to work dark matches to draw crowds, or what WWF talent would appear on the shows, although there will be some. Over the next 2 weeks, the plan is to try and finalize the WCW roster, including getting a front office staff, road agents, referees, and hire 3 writers to handle the television. There would be a different set of writers for the WCW show than for Raw and SmackDown, and it would largely be kept for several months at least as a separate entity. Nobody from WCW who is not picked up by WWF, and that don't appear to be under consideration to be picked up, has received any notice whatsoever of anything from WCW explaining their situation. At this point almost every wrestler is still getting paid and hasn't been informed. They are being cycled out. Raw after WrestleMania in Fort Worth was a weak show. Whether it was because of a post-Mania letdown or simply this is what the show will be without competition on Monday, we'll find out in a week or two. It was the McMahon family show more than ever, with wrestlers, even Austin, just being the incidental pawns in the family games. Stephanie was first out challenging Stratus to a country whipping match. She called Vince out, who yelled at Ross for calling him Satan at Mania. Vince smashed a cowboy hat to get heat and did everything he could to get Austin booed when he finally came out. Rock came out and demanded a title match. Crowd totally cheered Rock, since he was opposing Vince. There were Rock sucks chants earlier in the show. He put Vince in the sharpshooter, and in so much pain, Vince agreed to a title match and made it a cage match. Test and APA beat Guerrero and Saturn and Malenko in 4:05 when Test pinned Saturn with a scary boot to the face. Stephanie vs. Trish was the first non-ending. What a mess this was. Whatever miracle they performed on pay-per-view was lightning striking once. They wrestled like two valets on an indie show, trading whipping each other with a strap. Stephanie threw Lillian Garcia into Stratus, making a third amateur in the ring. Regal came out and then gave Stratus the worst neckbreaker you'll ever see and held her while Stephanie whipped her. Jericho ended up making the save. Stephanie threw a post-match temper tantrum on Regal. Rhino destroyed Crash Holly in 54 with the gore. Molly did a flip body block off the top onto Rhino, but he gored her as well. Heyman was clearly subconscious over everyone discovering Rhino's size in ECW was a gimmick in a company with tall guys, pushing that the idea that he's 6'2", he's really closer to 5'10", is a lot of credibility problem in a company that goes back and forth between giving real heights for giant guys. Albert and Test at 6'5" and 6'6" when they could easily get away with saying 6'7" and 6'8", which would be typical wrestling embellishment, and fake heights, Undertaker and Show being given the standard 2-inch exaggeration, and Kane given more than that, although he's got the Herman Munster boots to make him look several inches taller than he is. Vince came out again and introduced Austin. At this point nobody live knew what to make of Austin. As Austin insulted the crowd, they booed him, but it was that weak booing as opposed to vociferous booing. Austin made no explanation as to what he did. The rest of the show consisted of them teasing Triple H would turn on Austin and go babyface, although at the end it was a WCW-like swerve. Kane pinned Venus with a clothesline off the top in 5:41 of a hardcore match. Bad match. Buchanan and Goodfather joined in the post-match beatdown until Undertaker made the save. Undertaker and Kane each choke-slammed an RTC member. Triple H did a face promo, then confronted Vince and made Vince spill his coffee. As punishment for Jericho making the save earlier, Regal booked himself and Angle against Jericho in a handicap match. Angle hit Jericho with a chair and Regal used the neckbreaker for the pin in 4:33. Angle put the ankle lock on Jericho after until Benoit made the save. They are clearly building toward making Benoit and Jericho a face tag team, leading to Jericho turning on Benoit. That would only make sense since Jericho's heel turn is overdue. Then, guess what? They can still feud with each other at the same position for all eternity. X-Pac pinned Gunn in 3:01 after Albert used the Baldo Bomb, neck-hanging tree bomb's latest name. Baldo comes from Albert's ring name in Memphis, I guess, behind the ref's back. X and Credible gave Gunn the double superkick after the match. This was explained that Gunn was negotiating with Shane to join WCW, and Vince had them teach him a lesson. God help WCW if their big acquisition is Gunn. Shane did an interview from WWF New York. He didn't really say anything. Fans chanted WCW. I think that was a first in history. Austin vs. Rock was a non-finish in about 9 minutes. Fans were all for Rock, even chanting for him by this point. Austin juiced early from a belt shot. Vince distracted ref Tim White as Rock got the sharpshooter on. Austin's strong desire to withstand punishment is now gone as he tapped like crazy but no ref to see it. Rock gave him a people's elbow but Vince attacked White. White actually shoved down Vince. You knew that was going to be the end for him because in this soap opera, a bad guy gets it on occasion, but always comes out on top in the end. Rock used the rock bottom. Vince beat up White. Austin gave Rock a low blow. Vince beat up White some more. Then Vince and Austin doubled on Rock. Triple H came out with a sledgehammer for the supposed save. Quick! What's the purpose of a cage match in wrestling? Answer: there was once a purpose. But there isn't one anymore. Triple H shocked everyone who hadn't seen this kind of angle that doesn't make sense in WCW 1,000 times over the past 4 years by hitting Rock with a sledgehammer. They all destroyed Rock. Bad beating, including both a pedigree and a stunner. SmackDown notes from Oklahoma City, where everyone knew the big angle was Ross getting laid out by Austin. Some interesting notes before SmackDown started. Carlene Moore, Jazz in ECW appearing under that name, got a tryout in a dark match. Heat included Guerrero over Test for the European strap and Haku beating Raven clean with the death grip and Lita pinning Spike Dudley. So much for the Giant Killer, with a moonsault. SmackDown opened with Undertaker and Kane over Goodfather and Buchanan when Undertaker pinned Goodfather after the last ride. Vince did an interview ripping on the state of Oklahoma. He then said Rock was suspended and wouldn't be there. Rhino pinned K-Quick. Crash attacked Rhino after the match but he got gored as well. Angle and Regal beat Benoit in a handicap match. Regal puts on the Regal stretch while Angle put on the ankle lock and Benoit tapped out. Regal let go after the match but Angle wouldn't. Jericho made the save. Deborah said Rock shouldn't have been suspended. Jeff Hardy pinned Show. This was supposed to be Jeff's punishment for thinking of going to WCW. Match ended with Lita doing a moonsault, Matt doing a leg drop off the top and Jeff hitting the Swanton, and then all three cover Show and the ref gives Show a fast count. Earlier in the match Show had hit the ref. After the match Show went backstage after Jeff, but Undertaker and Kane beat him down with chair shots. X and Credible and Albert beat Gunn and Blackman and Sexay when X-Pac does the X Factor on Gunn and Credible pinned him. Linda does a taped interview saying she's taking over duties as CEO and was going to get Vince where it hurts. Oh my god, a work divorce and splitting the company. Ross interviewed Austin in the Big Angle. Austin's explanation was that he needed Vince as an insurance policy because he wasn't going to lose at Mania. He said he doesn't care about the fans because he never cared about the fans. Ross asked how he could align himself with the guy who tried to run him over. Wasn't that Rikishi and Triple H just the mastermind? And Austin said he wants somebody that's sick on his side. Ross talked about being there when he got out of surgery and he and his wife being the only guests at his wedding. Austin knocked off the hat and glasses and dares Jr. to hit him. Jr. walks away. Austin then jumped him. Austin beats on Ross until he juiced, then hit him with the belt and laid him out. Ross went out on a stretcher. Triple H won the IC title from Jericho. Stephanie distracted the ref whenever Jericho had a pin. Triple H tapped out to the walls but no ref. I think we saw that on Raw. Jericho put Stephanie in the walls but Triple H got a chair that Regal brought out and hit him, then gave him a pedigree for the pin. Triple H and Stephanie went to leave when Undertaker came out and choke slammed him. The Undertaker run-in and choke slam may have been off TV. In Marshall Fink's column on everyone being let go in the New York Daily News, he stated that Ted Turner had started WCW solely to drive McMahon out of business. It obviously didn't work. If that was the case, since Turner had the greater resources than McMahon, why didn't Turner ever attempt to actually do anything along those lines until 1994? Anyone who followed what went on in 1988, when Turner bought Jim Crockett Promotions, knows the main reason the company bought it was because Crockett was on the verge of bankruptcy and having to shut down his company. The weekend wrestling shows were highly rated fixtures on TBS, and the only way to keep wrestling on against the onslaught of McMahon, who was succeeding in running most of the rest of the companies out of business during that time period, was to own it themselves, since there were no other buyers out there. In addition, TBS and Crockett had just started working together for quarterly TV primetime specials, Clash of the Champions, which were garnering strong ratings and had started as partners in the early pay-per-view events. From 1988 through probably 1994, the company never attempted to outbid McMahon for the top talent, which would have been the first order of the day if there was an attempt to put McMahon out of business. There were occasional wrestlers who left McMahon on bad terms that came to WCW, but the first major raid was probably Randy Savage under Bischoff. Hulk Hogan wasn't a raid, as he had quit WWF 1 year earlier and was working for New Japan at the time he signed with WCW, although that history has also been rewritten. When Bischoff was at the helm, through the numerous raids and the advent of Nitro, there was a real attempt to compete for the first time. Another historical correction in the history of pro wrestling on TBS. When McMahon bought Georgia Championship Wrestling in 1984, the price he paid was $1 million, not $750,000 as listed. McMahon apparently claimed the $750,000 figure because he sold the time slot to Jim Crockett 1 year later for $1 million, and bragged he not only got the TV time on Turner's station for 1 year but also made a profit on the deal. In actuality, he didn't make a profit on the deal, but I guess that didn't make as good a story. Wrestlers still under contract to WCW, which means the wrestlers that WWF refused to pick up their contracts for, have been told that if they were to appear on any wrestling shows, they would be in breach of their contract. Time Warner is looking for any excuse to declare a breach so they don't have to pay any more than necessary, since the company WCW doesn't exist anymore. All of the wrestlers whose contracts have 90-day cycles are in the process of being cycled out, but they won't be able to work any indies, or probably do even any public interviews, or it will be considered the breach the company is looking for. Those without the 90-day cycles, which are the highest paid guys and biggest names such as Goldberg, Sting, Flair, Nash and DDP, won't be allowed to do any indies, or Japan for that matter, until the expiration of their deals. It is believed that Conan will still be able to work the already booked WWC tour in a few weeks, since when he took a big pay cut in his new contract as the company was cutting costs. In return, they gave him the right to work in Mexico and Puerto Rico, but he also can't work any U.S. indies. This seems to mean that the idea of Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes to do an indie feud, including on Rhodes shows, is out the window. Jimmy Hart will also remain under contract for about another year, although his contract may enable him to work indies because it wasn't a wrestler contract. There is also some very preliminary work regarding attempting to promote foreign tours using the WCW talent still under contract, but that would be a contract breach, so I don't see that happening, even though there is a lot of potential revenue in foreign touring, but more with WWF talent, since WWF is strong in so many countries that they don't visit because there is no point leaving the country when huge money can be made staying home. Hulk Hogan's attempted deal with Universal also seems to have fallen through. One of the reasons Flair's interviews on Nitro over the past few months weren't up to his usual standard were because he was banned by management from doing The Who. Ace told him he couldn't do it anymore because management felt that he was playing the role of the CEO and that a CEO shouldn't be saying who. Flair never could get into his rhythm without it. In his interview on the last Nitro, the ban was lifted and he did his best interview in a long time. While nobody has said so directly, the feeling is Ace was acting under orders from Bischoff. Lawler was on Wrestling Observer Live on March 28 talking about his situation. He read a letter he wrote on March 3 and faxed to Jim Ross to give to Vince McMahon, saying that he and his wife would both like to come back, saying she is willing to apologize to anyone for anything she might have done and promise it would never happen again. The letter touched on a potential problem with China and said they are willing to clear the air with her. Lawler also offered to work an angle based on what really happened. Lawler never heard back from McMahon after the letter. The Carter-China story goes like this. Lawler and Carter and Triple H in China were social friends, and they had stayed at his house when they were in Memphis, and Carter and Lawler had stayed at their house when in the New Hampshire area. There were problems in February of 2000 when Carter got engaged, and at the same time Triple H and Chyna broke up in China and Carter's friendship deteriorated. Lawler suggested putting Carter in the Guerrero angle as the mini Chyna, and they started the angle, but Chyna nixed it after the first night it played. Lawler also talked about the RTC angle the way he wrote it, which at the beginning didn't even involve him. It was originally in his writing to be an Ivory versus Cat match for the women's title after the Chyna injury angle, where Cat would lose, and each week on TV, they would bring Cat out with the RTC, but she would continue to take her clothes off and they would cover her up and also seduce the different members of the group. He said that on March 15th, Ross called him and offered to bring him back on Raw and to do pay-per-view events, and Heyman would work with Cole on SmackDown, but that Stacey wouldn't be invited back. Lawler attempted a compromise that would save face for both sides, in that Carter's contract was structured that she only got paid when he came to television. They could technically take her back, which would allow Lawler to save face in return, but not bring her to television, so they actually wouldn't have to pay her unless they came up with an angle to use her. Ross said he'd talk to McMahon about it in their meeting the next morning. This was also a conversation where Ross told Lawler they wouldn't stand in the way of Hales using Lawler and Carter on television. The next day after Lawler got the news from Hales that he'd heard from Bruce Pritchard and they gave him the ultimatum of either using Lawler or losing the developmental deal, Lawler called Kevin Dunn, who is the production head of WWF. Dunn said at the meeting McMahon decided that due to what Lawler had done to the company, the problems were too big to overcome and rescinded the offer. McMahon was mad at Lawler for walking out on a live shoot and more so for giving the email addresses of the writers and putting the company phone number on the internet. Lawler and Carter both got their release this past week, sent right after WWF bought WCW. The actual quote by Basil DeVito regarding the XFL ratings on UPN and TNN in response to the probable dropping by NBC is that on the other two networks the shows fared very well. The projected national rating for UPN was 3.0 and in recent weeks has been hovering at the 1.0 level, and the projected TNN rating was 2.5 and it's been at the 0.4 level. I'd hate to see what mediocre ratings would be. Brock Lesnar appeared on Wrestling Observer Live on March 29 talking about his background. Lesnar was approached first during his junior year by Gerald Briscoe and Ross, which was about the time a lot of people started talking about him because of his physique as a potential pro wrestler. He also had offers from WCW through Bischoff and New Japan through Brad Rheingans and Inoki. He didn't want to work in Japan, although he told a story about doing a 60-minute sparring session with Inoki and marveling at his conditioning for his age. He said at one point a few years ago he was interested in UFC after meeting Ken and Frank Shamrock, but he had never considered it a viable option over the last few years because the money wasn't good enough. He said if he hadn't have won the NCAA title in 2000, he would have continued in amateur wrestling and gone for the Olympics and Nationals because he would still have a goal to reach. He said winning the NCAA title accomplished his goal of winning a national championship, and he knew after winning it that he would never wrestle amateur again. He really praised the training system WWF has in Louisville. UPW on April 25th at the Galaxy Theater in Santa Ana, California has Edge and Christian defending the WWF tag titles against Nova and Frankie Kazarian, Samoa Joe defending the UPW title against Tommy Dreamer, who most expect to debut in WWF within a few weeks, Molly Holly versus Victoria, Prototype versus Mikey Henderson, and Tony Jones defending the Southern California title against Smelly. The show will have a live webcast starting at 11 p.m. Eastern at Upwood.com that night. Ross Report notes, which was mainly previewing Mania. Rikishi is out for another 4 weeks. Regarding WCW, he said they would assemble over the next 2 or 3 weeks a staff of agents. Arn Anderson and David Finlay's name have come up. Referees are ring crew, ring announcers, TV announcers and wrestlers. He said the WWF and WCW promotions would be kept separate with very little crossover with the exception of Shane McMahon appearing on both shows. Said interpromotional angles will be developed, but not soon and probably not until 2002. Said they first have to rebuild WCW. Since last summer, the popularity of pro wrestling has said to have substantially decreased in most of Asia as wrestling on television is regularly preempted by cricket and ratings overall have declined since WWF faces still competition from Friends, Really, and an Indian version of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire which dominates the time slot doing between 10 and 15 ratings. Friends does between 4 and 6 while wrestling hovers between 1 and 2. With WWF ratings being cut more than in half over the past year due to the competition, the ESPN Star Network, which broadcasted Raw, switched to Nitro about a month ago, and you can imagine what that did for the ratings. Now, for the network to even keep a wrestling show, they will have to rework the deal that just fell apart with WWF. WWF The Music CD was number 40 this week, having sold 42,107 units. On the Rec Sports video charts, WWF Royal Rumble moved up to number 2 behind only Michael Jordan. WWF had 11 of the top 20 videos, while Pro Wrestling accounted for 4 others, with Juggalos at number 13 and number 20, ECW at number 18, and FMW at number 19. WWF personality videos are seemingly passé as compared with theme videos. Of those in the top 20, only 3, Rock at number 6, Foley at number 14, and Jericho at number 16, are personality videos, and the rest are either major cards, Rumble, Rebellion, Armageddon, Survivor Series, or themes, tables, ladders and chairs, hardcore, most memorable matches. Divas TSN edited out the segment where Regal held Trish for Stephanie to whip her, but did air Regal giving Trish the worst neckbreaker of all time and Rhino spearing Molly Holly. Former WCW wrestler David Taylor, 45, worked a dark match at TV this week. Taylor was originally brought in to help train wrestlers for Tough Enough, but was pulled with the idea of making him a television character with some sort of an affiliation with Regal, his former WCW partner. If they used Taylor as a wrestler, he would pass Farouk, 42, as the oldest active wrestler in the WWF. Shawn Michaels' nephew, who wrestles as Michael Shane, and Rodney Benoit, who worked ECW as Red Dog, also got tryouts. It is said that the reason One Man Gang came in under that gimmick as opposed to his more campy Akeem gimmick is that he's lost 100 pounds since those days, and he looked it, and the Akeem costume didn't fit anymore. The fan access was a huge success from WWF's standpoint. The place was mobbed. Some had negative viewpoints, complaining about so many people there was barely room to breathe. All entrepreneurs and promoters should have such problems, and the long line for autographs being as much as a few hours. One fan paid $300 to get a chance to eat ravioli with Big Show, and another paid $205 to get a sock from Foley. UK ratings were low across the board for the week ending March 25. Raw drew 280,000 viewers, well below its usual 400,000 plus for the second straight week. Apparently there is a celebrity show called So Graham Norton which draws a similar audience to wrestling, whose numbers are increasing at the same pace Raw's are declining. SmackDown was viewed by 190,000. Nitro only drew 40,000, which is half of what Battledome was doing in the same time slot. The final Nitro aired the week after this past weekend. Livewire drew 60,000 and Heat on Channel 4 drew 1,180,000 viewers. The end of WCW may be the end of wrestling in Germany on television, as WWF programming was dropped last year and they only had WCW. SmackDown tapings on March 27 in Detroit sold out the Joe Louis Arena to the tune of $14,828, paying $499,565. Raw tapings on April 2 in Fort Worth drew a sellout 11,181, paying $285,781. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 95009-1228, ISSN 1083 9593, April 9, 2001. The Reader's Pages. WCW. I'm going to take the cynical view on WCW's death and simply say good riddance. At this point, selling the company to Fusient is like trying to start someone's heart again after they're already brain dead. I'm sure WCW's few remaining fans would have been happy to hear news of the sale, but really, you know, and everyone else also knows that unless you're a giant media conglomerate with billions of dollars to waste, like America Online/Time Warner, you're not going to be able to sustain losses of $1 million plus a week. If folding the company is the only way to get rid of certain ironclad cancerous contracts, and I don't think we need to list all the names, then it's worth the risk. The big names in wrestling are always going to get work somewhere, even if it's with an outfit like iGeneration. You know that somebody is going to be dumb enough to start a new operation with the talent and try to fight Vince. Admittedly, all the hard-working cruiserweights are screwed. But I think this provides a good lesson in economics for everyone. The ECW talent that left for WCW and made big money, but ECW died off in the long run. WCW bit off more than they could chew with big money contracts for no money talent, and they too are on the way out. Everyone on the outside knew the House of Cards was going to collapse one of these days, and propping it up further served no purpose that I can tell. Scott Keith. Approximately 2 years ago at this time, WCW Nitro came to Minneapolis. Not only was the event sold out in a few hours, but I had to call in a favor with a connection at Ticketmaster in order to get seats. Now WCW is dead. That this could happen is unbelievable and inexcusable. WCW at one time possessed the deepest talent pool of any US-based promotion in history and even greater corporate resources than even the WWF today. Who would believe that it could all fall apart so quickly? Even during ECW's glory years of 1995 and 1996, even after the company got on pay-per-view and got on TNN, the idea that they could go out of business was always there. ECW was always just a glorified indie promotion living hand to mouth. But WCW? This is just shocking. Eric Bischoff, Dr. Harvey Schiller, Brad Siegel, Bill Bush, Vince Russo, Kevin Nash and others all deserve collective blame and shame for killing a promotion that was so viable and for a time even dominant. Because of greed, ego, wastefulness, and incompetence, the pro wrestling industry has been irreparably damaged. Max Levy. The world is about to change. 5 years ago, this slogan was nothing more than failed hype for the debut of Ray Lloyd. Now, in light of the events of the past week, Eric Bischoff was a prophet. The dust has cleared in the ultimate battle of the wrestling war, and the final domino has fallen. The landscape has changed. This high-stakes poker game is over. WCW has folded and Vince McMahon holds all the cards. The implications of this monopoly are chilling for all the reasons you've previously stated. A monopoly benefits Vince McMahon. Competition benefits both the consumer and the wrestler. Competition is what created the financial boom in wrestling. The higher salary structure, more revenue, better work rate and higher television ratings were all due to competition. Now, the talent lacks any leverage for better salaries or benefits. It's Vince's sandbox. Play by his rules or you can't play at all. Many workers may be out of jobs completely. Backstage politics will take an even more preeminent role. For the fans, does the monopoly mean the downturn of the television product? Some of the worst Raws were the ones on unopposed nights. They knew they had the viewer, so they presented less than thrilling matchups. Does anyone remember WWF television before Nitro? Endless TV squashes. Nitro forced WWF to update the product and lose the TL Hopper and Goon matches. Mark Underwood. Just finished reading the March 26th Observer. Really enjoyed the analysis of the WCW demise. Great journalism. I'm convinced that one day Harvard and Stanford's business schools will do a case study on how not to run a company and use WCW from 1998 to 2001 as the prime example. Michael Ion. The WCW sale was brilliant. Some very good friends that I love dearly are going to continue making a living as pro wrestlers. These men are young, talented, creative and hungry for success. They have mortgages and care payments. Some have wives and girlfriends in college that they support. They worked hard to get their jobs. They worked harder once they got their jobs to improve in their craft. They have sacrificed so much in their personal lives to work for WCW. They sacrifice their bodies every time they step into the ring by doing innovative moves and crazy high spots to give the fans a good show. Wrestling is more than a job to them. It is life. They are good people with good hearts. They deserve to be able to continue living their dream. Shane McMahon running WCW will be wonderful. Shane has long been an advocate of young talent. He appreciates hard work and creativity and is a true believer in continuous improvement. I can't help but think WCW will be a success under him. I'm looking forward to the new WCW and WWF versus WCW programs. Considering the track record WWF has in cultivating young talent, the inexperienced but promising workers in WCW are going to be major stars in the next few years. Pro wrestling in the United States is at a dangerous precipice. I think the sale has made the future a little more bright. The eventual WWF versus WCW program will almost certainly keep fan interest high in both products. Potential jumps from one to the other will just add to that. I think this will make wrestling in general more fun. Just continue to willfully suspend disbelief and enjoy the show. I know I'm going to. Thomas Simpson. Response from Dave Meltzer. Without question, once the Turner Networks canceled wrestling and no other station wanted it, Vince McMahon buying the company and keeping it alive as a separate brand was the best thing for the business because the alternative was assimilating just a few people into the WWF instead of adding probably 30 wrestling jobs in the WWF. However, that is the only positive news of the past month. The lack of competition will in the long run hurt everyone making a living in the profession due to a lowering of the salary scale, with the exception of McMahon, and it will likely hurt him in the long run as well. There will likely be 100 plus people in the industry out of work based on the sale, and many talented and hard-working wrestlers are going to be eliminated from making a living due to politics, and many others are going to be eliminated by the profession that are marketable based on the strange nature of the sale, which will weaken the overall quality of the product from a talent standpoint. If there is poetic justice in this, it does appear that many of the people who were the most responsible for the destruction of WCW aren't likely to be hired by WWF. And a lot of the innocent victims of their ruination of the product that have talent in the ring are at least keeping their jobs. But there are plenty of innocent victims immediately and will be far more down the line. The lack of interest in television, which is the life's blood of the industry, is an ominous sign. The fact even McMahon could only get a Saturday night at 11 p.m. time slot on a weak station like TNN shows just how dear the television landscape is, and if McMahon's ratings at some point in a few years sink to just above average level, how easily television will consider it yesterday's fad. But anyone who could at least sustain a business with decent television time would have resulted in an environment far better for everyone in the industry. New competition. Why is it a given that a new promotion needs WWF production values? Yes, the WWF is number one right now, and they have tremendous production that would overshadow another promotion. But plenty of promotions have had success without big-time production in the past. Hollywood spends hundreds of millions of dollars on blockbuster films, but filmmakers can still turn a huge profit if they find a product people desire, even with little production costs like the Blair Witch Project. Likewise, WCW's ratings collapsed even with great production, and WWF's ratings rose at first without that same production. Just because incredible production is an important part of the WWF machine now doesn't mean another promotion inherently needs it as some sort of a given any more than it's true another promotion needs big guys or over-the-top storylines, because that's what the WWF has. Obviously, incredible production is a tremendous asset, but this is a new landscape, and there is nothing fundamentally vital about multi-million-dollar production. Todd Martin. XFL. I don't know if any of the other 10 people who watched the XFL game on March 24th noticed, but Jesse Ventura got in some major digs at Vince. The best one was after they aired one of the coaches talking on the headset, telling the players to watch their footing because a couple of guys had slipped. Ventura and Matt Vasgersian started laughing, saying it was a stupid thing to say. Then Ventura said it reminded him of some of the things he hears over his headset. Later, when Vasgersian said that something wasn't a rule in the XFL, Ventura said, "Wait until next week and it will be." As dull as the games were before, they are really bad now that Jim Ross is gone. No matter how bad things got, Ross always maintained his enthusiasm and made the games come across as interesting. It wasn't wrong to use Ross because he's a wrestling announcer. The mistake they made was presenting him as a wrestling announcer. It was just as silly to call him Junior in the black resistol hat on the XFL telecasts as if Jesse showed up with multicolored hair and a feathered boa. I have so much respect for Ross, however, if I didn't have a clue who he was, tuned in to watch a football game, and saw him standing there dressed like that and being called Junior, I probably would have written him off, too. Things that are fine within the world of wrestling don't always work in the real world. It's just too bad that someone of his talent was made a scapegoat for the failure of the league, when the reality is the product sucks. Michelle Malbouf. This is the Pro Wrestle Machine,